Welcome, everybody, to this White Coat Investor resident webinar. I'm going to go through a little bit of introductory material while people are still coming into the room here. I think we have close to 2,600 residents and fellows signed up for this webinar tonight. So we're excited about that. Obviously, all 2,600 of you aren't going to be here. That's typical of most webinars, but a few hundred of you will, and we're excited to be here with you. I've been looking forward to this all day. I'm Jim Dahle. I'm the founder of the White Coat Investor. I'm a practicing emergency physician. In fact, I have a shift at 6 a.m., so we won't be here all night tonight. I can promise you that. I am here today with Andrew Paulson. Andrew is the founder of studentloanadvice.com, which seems to be the most important aspect of this particular presentation. And so you'll be excited to hear from a true expert when it comes to student loan management. By the way, if you're struggling with student loans, if you're not sure what to do, book a consult with Andrew. Studentloanadvice.com is where you can do that. Our plan for tonight is to present. We've got some slides. We're going to present. We're going to talk on a number of topics that are super important for residents, for fellows. I mean, if you're a student, you're welcome to be here. If you're an attending, you're welcome to be here. If you're not even in medicine, you're welcome to be here. But this is aimed at trainees. That's who it's aimed at. So we're going to present for maybe an hour 15, hour 20 minutes. And then we're going to answer your questions. And if this goes anything like the student webinar we did a couple of months ago, the questions are going to take longer than the presentation. And you guys will be here as long as we'll stay asking questions. So we'll stay as long as we can answering your questions. The way you ask your questions is in the chat. Okay, there's a chat, whatever forum you're on. And you can just put your questions in there. They come to us in written format and we'll go through those. You don't have to wait until the presentation's over to start asking them. But keep in mind that what usually happens is people are hesitant to put their questions in at the beginning. And at the end, when we're about to leave, we get like a dozen more questions. So put your questions in early and we'll get them answered. By the way, I don't know what platform you're on watching this. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on X, we're on Facebook. The best place to watch this is YouTube. Okay, the chat works the best. The quality tends to be the best. So if you have a choice, you may want to watch this on YouTube. For those of you who can't stay the whole time, if you fall asleep because I know you're exhausted, it's okay. We're recording this. You're going to get an email with the recorded total seminar with all the Q&A and everything. So don't feel like if you got to run out and use the bathroom or something, you're gonna miss something. This is going to be recorded. All right. We have a new course out, by the way. Fire Your Financial Advisor is our flagship course. It helps you to get a written financial plan in place. We think it's an awesome course, but it has had a problem for the last 6 or 7 years that we've had it. It's not really priced for students and residents. So we just came out with a student and resident version of this course. There's a student version, there's a resident version, but basically this is the course that now grows with you. You can buy the student course, then you upgrade to the resident course, then you can upgrade to the attending course. There's even a version of the course that offers CME. But the resident version of the course is $299. It's perfect for residents and fellows, and you get credit for that when you go to buy the full course later as an attending. And from now through July 7th, it's not even $299. It's 20% off that. What is that? $239, something like that. All right. And so it's on a discount for the next week. So check that out if you're interested. You can check that out, whitecoatinvestor.com/FYFA. By the way, leave us some notes in the comments. We're considering writing a resident book, a shorter book than our student book, but with the same goal to sort of give it away to residency programs, residents in residency programs via some type of a champions program. If you'd be interested in seeing that, helping us to get the word out to other residents and fellows through a program like that, let us know in the comments. All right, let's get into the presentation here. As I mentioned, Andrew's here with me. He's going to be doing the student loan presentation, which is going to be in the middle of the presentation. Let me pull up our slides to start with. What am I doing wrong here, Andrew? Are these slides not going up here, Andrew? What's the problem? There we go. All right. So we're calling this what residents need to know about money. And like I said, this is aimed at residents and fellows, although as you guys know, 90% of personal finance applies to everybody. Some caveats before we get into this too far. I think this is important anytime we're talking about money in a medical group. It's important to point out that money doesn't actually make you any happier. It's not entirely true. It does make you happier. More income does to a certain point, but at around $75,000 or $100,000 a year, that really starts plateauing quite a bit. You didn't go into medicine for money. Neither did I. We were like Rick Hodes here, who you see in the picture, who treats patients with tuberculosis in their spine in Africa, right? We just wanted to help people. We love science. That's what we put on our essays when we went to medical school. But the truth is, if you ignore money, it can make your life miserable. We are firm believers here at the White Coat Investor that doctors who have their financial ducks in a row are better doctors. You're a better physician. You're a better partner. You're a better patient, or not a better patient. You're a better parent. Maybe you're a better patient too. I don't know. But we just think it's really important. So why am I giving the talk? Well, I got really excited about the time I was in residency about personal finance and investing. And the reason was because I got ripped off. I got ripped off by everybody. Recruiters, realtors, lenders, insurance agents, financial advisors. I even got ripped off by an appraiser, and I got sick of it and wanted to start learning this stuff. So I started self-educating, reading books, reading blogs, participating on forums. And after a few years, I realized I was answering a lot more questions than I was asking. And I thought it'd be easier if I just started a blog and I could just post a link to the blog post every time I got the same question over and over again. And that was the origin of the White Coat Investor way back in 2011. We started a newsletter the year after that. I wrote a book in 2014. We started a forum in 2016, the podcast, which is probably the way most of you heard about this, in 2017, another book in 2018. That's also the year we started our conference and some online courses. In 2019, we branched out to Reddit, Facebook, started a YouTube channel, another book in 2021. We started a second podcast in 2021, another book in 2022 on asset protection. And this year we came out with the student and resident courses that I just mentioned. All right, a few disclosures and disclaimers. The White Coat Investor is a for-profit company. We're actually trying to make money here. We have to make payroll every month. 18 people work here. They all want to be paid. They all want to have their health insurance paid for. So we have to make some money. Most of the information we provide, I don't know, 98% of it is totally free to you, but we do sell ads. Okay, so if you go to the website, you're going to see ads. If you buy our stuff, books, courses, come to the conference, etc., we're going to make money. But I'm really big on disclosing financial conflicts of interest. All right. So if it's not clear to you where our financial conflicts of interest are, let me know and I'll make it very, very clear. But I'm a practicing doc. I'm not a licensed accountant. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a financial advisor. That means everything we talk about tonight is general education. It's for your entertainment. You shouldn't consider it, formal, personalized accounting, legal, or financial advice. All right, here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about 6 truths about money in medicine. Even if you can only stay for that, 10 or 15 minutes, that's going to be well worth your time. We're going to talk about protecting your income and your family. Then Andrew's going to take over, and he's got quite a presentation on student loan management in 2024. And this changes, it feels like, every 2 months, but he's going to go through that. We're going to talk about spending. I love to spend money. It's important that we spend money in a way that's going to make us happy. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about investing for residents, and then we're going to talk about contracts and the job hunt, and especially how to transition to being an attending, financially speaking. Okay, the truth about money in medicine. Few of you went into medicine primarily for financial reasons, right? You put on your med school application essay that you really love people and you love science and you want to help people, right? That's what we all put. And we truly believe it. I know you believe it because I call you at 3 o'clock in the morning and you get out of your bed and you come into the ER and you take care of patients. Remember that excitement you had when you got into medical school, that excitement you had when you matched into your specialty? Then somewhere in that intern year, that idealism kind of gets beaten out of you a little bit. And it's unfortunate. Everybody hates to see it, but it happens to the best of us. And we care a little bit more about money than we used to. And the truth is that very few attending physicians would practice medicine for free. It is also true that the financial lives of doctors diverge early in their career, but the results actually don't get seen for decades. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I've got some slides you'll find interesting. Here's number 4. Future you, right? This is you at 40 years old, okay? 10 years out, you're going to want some options in your life. Options that are available only by making specific financial choices today. The truth at number 5 is that intra-specialty pay, the variation in intra-specialty pay, dwarfs what you see on those interspecialty pay averages. You may not believe me, but it's true. The last one is that getting rich is simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And I'm going to teach you how to do it. Okay, Money in medicine. This is a really important slide for you to see at the beginning of your career. And I know the chart's kind of small and the numbers are kind of little there. There's not much I can do about that. As you would expect, early in their careers, physicians don't have much net worth, right? Most of you have a negative net worth. That's okay. That's normal. That's to be expected. And you can see that big blue line on the left there of physicians whose net worth is under $500,000, right? If you're under 28 years old, that's 95% of you. However, as you go through your career, that number drops and the other numbers come up. But what I want you to concentrate on in this chart is I want you to go to that 60 to 64 range and that 65 to 69 years old range. And I want you to look at the people, the doctors, who have a net worth of under $500,000. You'll see there that 11 to 12% of doctors in their 60s, after 30 years of physician paychecks, still have a net worth under $500,000. What's net worth? Net worth is everything you own minus everything you owe. That's everything. Bank accounts, investments, house, cars, clothes, everything. Under $500,000 after 30 years. They've made $5 to $10 to $15 million. And what do they have left? Less than $500,000. 25% of them are not even millionaires in their 60s. And I think that's really sad. I think that really shouldn't happen. And so I've been on a bit of a crusade the last 15 years to try to keep it from happening. All right, this is another important thing to realize. Burnout happens in medical school, it happens in residency, but it tends to get worse throughout your career. And if you ask docs of any age, whether they're millennials, Gen X like me, or boomers, and you'll see a pretty significant percentage of doctors, in this case, 36 to 50%, say burnout has a strong or severe impact in your life. Right now, I look at the number of people in here. There's 760 of you in here. So that means 380 of you are going to have severe burnout at some point during your life. You need to prepare for that financially starting today. And this is another important thing to realize. You're going to want options. You're going to want options by mid-career. By the time you're 40, 45, 50, you're going to want options. When I ask a group of docs anonymously what they would do if I just gave them a check for more money than they're ever going to need, more money than they're ever going to spend. You know, let's say $20 million, right? The check's good. They can cash it. They never have to work again. What would they do? A third of them will tell me they would retire completely, basically wouldn't show up to work tomorrow. And another 47% tell me that they would cut back. They'd go part-time. Okay. So what that tells me is 90% of doctors are working at least partially for the money. Okay. That's going to be you. In 10 years, 15 years, you'll be working at least partially for the money. You will wish you had options that allowed you to cut back, to go part-time, drop call, stop doing procedures you don't like, whatever. And the only way you can get there is by taking care of your finances starting today. All right. How much you get paid doesn't depend in medicine on how much you know. I'm sorry. You don't get paid more for getting a PhD and a master's and doing an MPH during med school and, doing 6 years of post-residency training. That doesn't increase how much you pay. You get paid. It doesn't matter how unpleasant your work is, how much call you get. That doesn't affect how much you get paid either. Market forces really don't work that well in medicine. And as a general rule, procedures pay better than thinking. Many of us wish this isn't the way it was. The hardest things I do are not the procedures I do. They are taking care of, septic grandma that I got to call 6 family members and 4 consultants and try to eke out a history from a husband that doesn't know anything and grandma who can't tell me anything. That's the hardest thing I do in the emergency department. Not doing a 2-centimeter laceration that's going to pay me 3 times as much, but this is just the way it is in medicine. And pretending it isn't that way is a bad idea. Okay, here's the other thing that a lot of docs are surprised. If you look at salary trends, docs actually get paid more year after year after year. I know they complain they don't. They complain they're getting their Medicare reimbursements cut. But if you actually look at what they're making, on average, doctors are making more and more each year. On average, the average doc is making something like $340,000, $350,000 a year. A little bit less for primary care, a little bit more for specialists, but those are the averages. But if you look at the averages by specialty, you'll see quite a bit more variation. You see preventive health at the bottom at $243,000. You see plastic surgery up here at the top at $576,000. But the truth is that within each of those specialties, there is a huge variation, and the variation is much larger than the difference between 243,000 and 576,000. Let's look at my own specialty of emergency medicine. Okay, this is a few years old, all right, but I thought it was really good because it demonstrates my point. This is probably 2017 or 2018 or something like this. You will see that the 10th percentile for an employee emergency physician back then was about $213,000. Now, if you go to the lower right on this chart, you'll see the 90th percentile for partner emergency physicians is $510,000. Look at that difference. It's $300,000 difference. They're making nearly twice as much. And if you look at any specialty, you'll see this much variation. There's a ton of variation in what doctors make, even within a given specialty. In general, you make more by working more hours, by having a better payer mix, by having ownership, right? By owning your practice in some way. And of course, doing more procedures helps. Okay. Yeah, I've met psychiatrists, I've met family practitioners with 7-figure incomes. So if you think you can't have a higher income, you're simply mistaken. There's no reason you have to settle for the average in your specialty. But the truth is, if you can't live on a couple $100,000, you have a spending problem, not an earning problem. I have medical students over to the house from time to time, and I tell them this, and they all laugh because they think it's so obvious and it's so funny. When I say that to a group of attending physicians, they don't think that's funny at all, because many of them are spending more than $200,000 a year. They're spending $300,000, $400,000 a year. It's really not that hard to spend money. It's a lot of fun, actually. But that's the problem most docs have. It's not an earning problem. Most Americans have an earning problem, but most doctors do not have an earning problem. They have a spending problem. But the truth is, it's easier to pay off debt. It's easier to get a big nest egg. It's easier to give to charity and support your family and whatever other causes you want to support. And it's easier to buy expensive stuff if you have a higher income. And the truth is, you're going to care a lot more about your income and your lifestyle 10 years from now than you did as an MS3 choosing your specialty than you do now as a resident and a fellow. It will matter more to you if you're like the typical physician. Okay, here's another important point you need to understand. Wealth is not income. Let me say that again. Wealth is not income. Most people do not understand this. The media doesn't understand this. Even the IRS doesn't understand it, right? They tax income, not wealth. Rich people don't necessarily have a high income. They don't necessarily make a lot of money. They have a lot of money. So how do you measure wealth? Well, you measure it with net worth. That's everything you own minus everything you owe. Many people also mistake assets for liabilities, right? They think their car is an asset. They think their house is an asset. But in reality, assets are things that pay you. Liabilities are things you pay for. So the house you live in, for which you've got to pay insurance, you've got to pay property taxes, you've got to pay maintenance costs, and your car, you've got to pay to insure and maintain and gas up and all that. Those aren't assets. They're liabilities. Okay, so what do you want to be buying, particularly at this stage of your career? You want to be buying assets. The process of wealth creation is taking income, that high income you'll soon be earning, and turning it into wealth. That's what wealth creation is. You take income, you turn it into wealth. Take money you earn, pay your taxes on it, pay your living expenses. What's left goes toward assets. All right, so here it is. The moment you've all been waiting for. How to get rich. All right, step one, make a lot of money. For most of you, you're almost there. This is going to happen. A couple of years, a year, 4 years, whatever. You're going to check your bank account one August 1st day, and somebody's going to drop $25,000 or $30,000 in there. And it's going to be life-changing to you. And then it's going to happen again the next month, and the month after that, and the month after that. So step one, you're almost there. You've got a lock on that. The other steps, not so easy. Step two is don't spend a lot of money, right? Because you've got to carve out some sort of differential between what you're making and what you're spending. That's what you use to build wealth with. Okay. Then you take that money that you carve out and you invest it. You make it work as hard as you do, so it starts earning money. Then you make sure you don't lose the money. Common reasons why doctors lose them are the big D's, right? Death, disability, divorce. But you can lose them to fraud or stupid investing tricks or using too much leverage, those sorts of things. So don't lose your money once you get it. The greatest task of your financial life is actually to acquire a retirement nest egg. And it's going to be a 7-figure amount, because you're going to need approximately, in order to be financially independent, in order to retire, about 25 times what you spend each year. Right now, that might not be that much, but by the time you're attending a physician, you'll be spending more. And so for a typical doc, this is $2 million, $4 million, $5 million, $8 million, that sort of an amount. That's the greatest task of your financial life, saving up that nest egg. And that's going to require like 20 to 30 years of saving 20% of your income. If typical physician income, something like $300,000, that means putting $60,000 a year just toward retirement. That doesn't count saving up for your Tesla. That doesn't count saving for your kids' college or paying off your student loans or paying off your mortgage. That's what it takes to get to that sort of a nest egg. And it's important to see that from the beginning of your career, so you don't put saving for retirement off for 5 or 10 years. So you don't think you're doing good just to max out a 401k at $23,000. You probably need to be putting more than that away. And every year you don't do that is just pushing back that retirement date. Now, it's possible to get there faster than 20 years, primarily by earning and saving more, but also through being an entrepreneur, taking on more investment and leverage risk. It can be done faster, but that's a pretty typical pathway that's not particularly complicated, that any of you can do just by simply following that plan. All right, you may have seen this before. This comes from a fellow by the name of Pete. He's a blogger that started a blog the month before the White Coat Investor called Mr. Money Mustache. And he published a blog post many years ago that he titled The Shockingly Simple Math of Early Retirement. And he didn't use the gross savings rate, like I recommend you save 20% of your gross. And let me pause for just a minute, because there are now 1,000 of you on this webinar. I just want to congratulate all 1,000 of you for getting on here and doing something about your finances. Welcome. Those of you who didn't catch the very beginning, it's all right. We're recording this, and you'll get an email with the full recording so you can catch what you missed. If you want to ask questions, you can put those in the chat. We recommend you watch this on YouTube. It's probably the best platform for watching this, and we'll get to your questions after we're done with the presentation. At any rate, if you've had a moment to look at this chart, you'll see if you're not saving anything, you're never going to be able to retire, right? Other than on Social Security. If you're saving everything, you could retire today because you don't need any of your money that you're earning. The rest of us are somewhere in between. Now, I'm recommending you save 20% of gross. Maybe that's 30% net. And so that would suggest, like I told you, about 28 years before you'll be financially independent. But if you'd like to retire earlier, if you'd like to be financially independent earlier, primarily what that depends on is just saving more money. If you save 40, 50, 60% of your net income, you can get that down to less than a 20-year career, less than a 15-year career before you're financially independent. This doesn't require you to do anything special other than to go to work, stuff away some money into a boring investment strategy, and you'll get there. It's really not that hard. It's just math. It's just math, and you can get there. But it's important to understand that math from the beginning of your career. Okay, so what I'm telling you all this for is that I want you to just care a little bit about your finances. Care how much you get paid. Care how much you save. Calculate it each year, right? Calculate your savings rate. Everything that went to retirement divided by everything you made. Care about how the money is invested. Actually read your 401k document that HR gives you, right? The combination of financial literacy and financial discipline is so rare in our society that if you can get both of them, it's like having a superpower. You're going to look around at everybody else and go, why isn't anybody else doing this? Why doesn't anybody else know this? Why am I the only one? And it's pretty amazing, actually. And you can really create a pretty awesome life, help a lot of other people, enjoy a few luxuries, and quit worrying about money. Okay, let's go on to our next subject. Let's talk about insurance. Insurance during residency. This is all about protecting your income, about protecting your family and yourself from bad things happening to you. And let me assure you, bad things happen to doctors all the time. They happen to residents, they happen to fellows, they happen to attendings, they even happen to medical students every now and then. Your greatest asset right now is your ability to turn your time into money at a very high rate. Now, if the average doc's making something like $340,000 right now, over 30 years, that's $10 million. If that's your greatest asset, don't you think you ought to protect it? And the way you protect that asset is disability insurance. And doctors really do become disabled. Right now, 12 to 18% of Americans are disabled. Up to 1/3 of Americans will have a disability that lasts at least 90 days. Up to 1/8 will have a disability that lasts at least 5 years. And most of these are not the car wrecks you think or falling off a cliff like you might think. Most of them are illnesses, right? It's back injuries or, arthritis or cancer or whatever, right? I've got 5 women in my neighborhood right now who have breast cancer. It happens, right? Some of them are very young. And docs also have higher rates of musculoskeletal and, believe it or not, mental disabilities. So this stuff does happen. Insurance companies tell me about 1 out of 7 docs who has disability insurance will actually make a claim on it at some point during their career. Okay, so long-term disability insurance pays a monthly benefit if you become disabled. Typically, it doesn't kick in for 90 days. It takes them 30 days to give you your first payment. So really, you got to make it about 120 days before disability insurance is going to start paying you. That benefit is generally tax-free unless the premium was paid by your employer with pre-tax dollars. And you can generally insure something like 60 to 70% of your gross income, which after tax usually works out to be about all of your net income. So when should you buy it? Now, right? This presentation's for people who are making money. You don't make a lot. I get that. You're an intern, you're a resident, you're a fellow, whatever, but you're making money. It's time to buy disability insurance. So how much should you buy? Well, ideally, you buy enough to cover your spending, what you spend each month, plus enough to save for retirement. Because remember, these policies are only going to pay you most of the time to age 65 or 67. After that, all you're going to have is Social Security if you don't save anything. So it's got to pay you enough to cover your spending and enough for you to save for retirement. So as a resident, what that usually means is that you should buy as much as they're going to sell you, which is usually like $5,000, a benefit of $5,000. If you get disabled, they pay you $5,000 a month. That's only $60,000 a year, right? That means living on essentially a resident salary for the rest of your life. It's not a ton of money, but it sure beats having nothing. I can tell you that. Okay, there are individual policies and there are group policies. Individual policies are generally better, but more expensive. That's what you need to know about them. You get a stronger definition of disability, which is really important. It's portable, meaning if you leave one job and go to another, you can take it with you. You get more options, right? There's more riders, more things you can do with it. It'll cost you more, and it's actually more difficult to qualify for most of the time. If you're not as healthy, if you've got some dangerous hobbies, it might be more difficult to qualify for. A group policy is usually what you get from your employer. And many of you as residents have an employer-provided group disability policy. These typically have a weaker definition of disability, meaning they're harder to qualify for in those gray area disabilities. It often does not go with you when you leave, and you don't get to choose between different policies. You got to take whatever they're offering you. It is usually cheaper, and they often ask fewer questions. It might not even require an examination at all. So as you can see, it can make sense to have a group disability policy if you have some health problems, if you have some dangerous hobbies, if you don't like filling out questionnaires or doing exams or giving your blood or those sorts of things, then a group policy can make some sense. When I had disability insurance, I had an individual policy that would not pay if I got disabled rock climbing, and I had a group policy that would pay. And so I actually owned both types of policies during that period of my career when I needed disability insurance. Okay, there's lots of riders that these are sold with. This is like an additional part of the policy. Sometimes you got to pay extra for it. Some of them are worth it, some of them are not. The ones that aren't worth it, I'd just rather see you buy more of the basic disability benefit. Use your money there rather than on the rider. But some that I think you really need to have, the most important one is a residual disability rider or a partial disability rider. This is the one that pays you if you're only partially disabled, or while you're coming back from a disability and can't work full time, it'll pay you something. I think it's a really important rider. Everybody ought to have it. A cost of living adjustment rider doesn't increase your benefit until a year after you're disabled, but then it goes up each year with inflation. So I think if you're buying a policy as a resident or fellow, you definitely should get one of these. If you're buying a policy in your 30s, maybe your 40s, you definitely should get one of these. In your 50s or 60s, maybe it's not worth it. The future purchase option. If you're a resident or fellow, buy this, okay? Because what this does is it allows you to buy more insurance even if you develop a medical problem between now and the end of your training. It doesn't cost that much more. And lots of residents, this is all they're able to buy after they become an attending because they develop a problem. So get the future purchase option rider. Once you're an attending, you're buying all the disability insurance you need. You might not need another future purchase option or future increase option. You know, they're named different things by different companies, but most people in training should definitely buy one of these. There's a rider called the catastrophic disability rider that pays you more if you get really disabled and you can't do 2 or more activities of daily living. I don't think that's worth it. Just buy a larger policy. Retirement rider, the insurance company will also put some money into an annuity to help you save for retirement. I think that's really only worth it if you can't buy as big of a policy as you'd otherwise like to buy. I find it gimmicky. I'd rather not see you saving for retirement in an annuity. So I'd pass on that. Just buy a larger base policy. Same thing with a student loan rider. Just get a bigger policy, right? Your disability insurance benefit can be used to pay on your student loans, but lots of student loans, particularly federal student loans, go away if you get permanently disabled. Okay, you can save money on disability insurance, but you're going to get sticker shock, right? This is expensive stuff. You're going to pay 2 to 6% of the monthly benefit. So if you bought a benefit that paid you $10,000 a month, right? $120,000 a year, that's going to cost you, if you buy it when you're young and healthy, something between $200 and $600 per month. It's a big chunk of your budget as a resident, right? As a fellow, that's a big chunk of your budget. And so don't let the sticker shock keep you from buying it. It's important. The reason it costs so much is because people actually use it. But you could save some money by doing what I did, splitting between an individual and a group policy. You can save some money by buying from an independent agent, right? Like the ones we recommend at whitecoatinvestor.com. We've got a recommended list of insurance agents. They can sell you a policy from any of the big 5 companies and get you the best one for you, right? The policies that are best for you vary by state, by gender, by specialty, and by health problems. For most emergency physicians, a principal policy, for instance, is the better policy. But that's not the case for every specialty. If you're a female, look for a unisex policy. They're harder and harder to get. But if you get a gender-specific policy, it's going to cost you more as a woman because women are more likely to put in a disability claim. Just like men are more likely to die, they pay more for life insurance. You pay more for disability insurance. When you no longer need some of those riders, cancel them. You can also consider a graded premium policy. I really like these for those people who save a lot of money and are going to hit financial independence early because you pay lower premiums early in your career and higher premiums later in your career. Well, if you become financially independent, you can just cancel the policy. You no longer need to pay the premiums at all, and all you ever paid were those lower premiums. So I like the graded premium policies. Okay, if you already have a medical problem, and it doesn't take much of a medical problem, right? Hypertension, you had cancer 4 years ago, but it's totally cured. You had one visit to the doctor for back pain, right? These are the things I'm talking about when I'm talking about medical problems. Or if you scuba dive or climb rocks or go mountaineering or fly or skydive, those sorts of things, okay? It becomes harder to get insurance. So the best deal, especially right now while you're in training, is to see if your academic center is associated with a guaranteed standard issue policy, a GSI policy. These are the best policies out there for those with medical problems or dangerous hobbies. They're generally a little bit more expensive than a fully underwritten policy, and sometimes they're not quite as good as what you can get as a fully underwritten policy, but you can get it without any special exclusions for your medical problems or hobbies. So get the GSA policy in place first, then go meet with one of our recommended insurance agents for an underwritten policy. And if you can get it, then take the underwritten policy. If you can't, no big deal. You've already got the GSI policy. Even when meeting with an independent agent, have them shop you around informally. Have them ask the companies how they're going to treat your particular medical problem. You don't want to be declined. Okay? You don't want it to be the surprise decline that you get, because then you have to report that every time you apply for insurance again in the future. So you want to know before you apply if you're likely to be declined. And they'll tell you. The underwriters will tell you if your agent shops you around informally. So talk to the agent about that. Okay, let's switch gears. Disability helps you. Even if you're single, you need disability insurance. It also helps your family. But term life insurance isn't for you because you're dead. Right? Term life insurance helps your dependents. If anyone else depends on your income, you got a spouse, a partner, kids, parents, whatever. If someone else is depending on your income, you need term life insurance. You need a big fat policy, way more than you probably think you need. If you have a stay-at-home parent, right, they might need a policy too, because they have serious economic value. You think about how much it would cost to hire out all the things your stay-at-home spouse is doing right now. And you might realize that you need a policy of hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars on that person to replace their economic value to the family. But basically, term life is pure life insurance, right? You pay a premium each month or each year. And if you die during the term it's in force, it gives you a big whopping sum of cash. And it's not gray like disability where you get these huge long policies and you got to read all the definitions and everything. It's black and white. You're either alive or dead. So it's pretty easy to buy. It's not expensive either. It's way cheaper than disability insurance. Okay. A 10-year policy is as little as $17 a month. For a healthy woman that's like 25 or 28, you get $1 million for $17 a month, right? There's no reason not to have this if people depend on you. Typically, I recommend docs get 20 or 30-year policies. You want a policy that's going to last until you're financially independent. But even that, look at it. It's just not that expensive. $45 a month, right? Your disability insurance, you're probably paying, $200, $300, $400, $500 a month. You can get a couple $1 million worth of term life insurance for less than $100. And as noted earlier, it's cheaper for women than it is for men. So you use term life insurance for income protection during your career. And for most people, this is all the life insurance they ever need to buy. But lots of life insurance agents will try to sell you a different life insurance product called whole life insurance, which is not nearly as good for you. It's very good for them because the premiums are really high. And so the commissions are really high and they make a lot of money off it. So it's a product designed to be sold by them, not bought by you. And when doctors buy it, most of the time they regret it. You end up with really expensive insurance. It costs like 8 to 20 times as much for the same death benefit, combined with what essentially works out to be a crummy investment, right? It accumulates cash value that you can borrow against for various purposes. There's lots of different things you can use it for, but the truth is there's something better to use for almost everything that you can use a whole life insurance product for. So don't buy whole life insurance. Buy term life insurance, especially early in your career. You're a resident, you're a fellow, you got a bunch of student loans, you got a whole bunch of great uses for your money. You don't need to be pouring it into a whole life insurance policy. I estimate less than 1% of doctors ever have a need for whole life insurance. All right, so how much term life insurance do you buy? Well, you decide what you want the money to do. Do you want your spouse to never have to work again? Then you're going to need 25 times your annual expenses in term life insurance because you don't have any assets yet, right? If you got a bunch of assets, you can subtract that from the amount you need, but that's basically the way it works. If you want it to pay off the house, if you want to pay for college, you got to add that in there. Remember that most of your federal and most private student loans are forgiven at death, but you add it all up, round up to the nearest million, and you'll probably end up with something between 2 and 5 million for most docs. That's what most docs have for term life insurance during the first half of their career. All right, Andrew, you got 1,200 people in here that are showing up to learn about student loan management. So I'm going to duck out for a minute and let you take over.
Perfect. All right. Well, this is the part everyone's looking forward to, right? A little brief hiatus. But all right, let's talk about student loan management. I'm Andrew Paulson. I have a master's degree in accounting, and I'm a certified student loan professional. I'm the co-founder and lead student loan consultant at studentloanadvice.com. And our team has advised on about $680 million of student loan debt across the country for doctors and dentists. My inspiration personally came when I was trying to help my wife figure out how to get out of nursing school student loans debt. So a little bit on studentloanadvice.com, we create custom student loan plans using the same principles that we're talking about today. And our consulting process works. We do a one-on-one meeting where you'll meet with one of our student loan pros, and they will guide you through your best options to manage your student loans. PSLF, refinancing, married filing separately, income-driven repayment programs. Which payment program should I be on? Any strategies in the book to help you save money on your student loans? We are all over that. How are the news? What's happening in the news? Those are all the sorts of things we're keeping our pulse on every single day. And bottom line, we're trying to help you save time and money and give you answers. You're busy. You've got all that it requires right now to be as residents, as fellows, and maybe early attendees. You're very busy, and you don't have hours and hours to scour the web to figure all this stuff out. In a one-time call for 1 hour, we can help you out. If you're interested in learning more about us, we also, here on this QR code, that's how you sign up for our newsletter, and it's free once a month. You'll hear from us on just student loan matters. So go ahead and sign up for our newsletter. So what we're going to talk about today is first, student loans 101, federal student loans, private student loans, all the loan forgiveness programs you need to be aware of, and private refinancing. And then we're going to talk about how do you put this into practice? Student loan management for trainees, and how to really optimize this, because right now is the most tricky time in your financial career. You've started to make money, but it's not enough to, be able to hit all of the different financial goals that you have, most likely, right? So we'll talk about the two most common strategies of paying the loans off aggressively or pursuing loan forgiveness, and then a couple of strategies to help you optimize your loan repayment. So we know where things are today for student loans. 4 years ago, the average debt for DOs was $240,000. For MDs was $200,000. And for our dentists out there is about $300,000. But half of you out there have more than this. $300,000 to $450,000 of student loan debt is extremely common. The average borrower that we meet with owes $350,000. We have seen docs that owe $700,000, $800,000, all the way up to seven figures, or $1 million in student loans. So it's becoming very, very common, to see these large balances. And another point is that the government will not refinance your interest rates on your federal student loans if rates drop. For those of you right now that have recently borrowed, you probably have fixed interest rate loans. That means as rates go up, your rates don't change. And as rates go down, your rates don't change because they are fixed. So federal student loans are the most common form of borrowing. That's probably where the lion's share of your loans are. The interest rates are anywhere from generally 3 to 9%. And right now, for your peers that are students, interest rates for this academic year are 8 and 9%. Pretty mind-boggling where things have gone. It comes in a variety of flavors: direct Stafford unsubsidized, Stafford subsidized, direct plus graduate loans, and family federal education loans. Subsidized loans were discontinued for graduate and professional degree programs in 2012. So if you've recently graduated, which many of you have, you probably have unsubsidized loans, which means they perhaps were growing during medical school. Maybe they weren't because of the COVID pause, right? From March of 2020 until September, October of last year, there was no interest, right? Everything was frozen. There was no payments due. But generally, when you're in school, those unsubsidized loans, they are growing and they are accumulating interest. And subsidized don't. And there's also family federal education loans. Those are really an older loan program that was discontinued back in 2010. But those also come in the subsidized and unsubsidized variety as well. Federal student loans have 4 main protections. Number 1, a plethora of repayment plans that we're going to discuss more. They have forbearance and deferment, where you can temporarily put your loans on pause and not make payments. Please, if you are in training right now, do not go into forbearance. Please make sure that you are in a repayment program, because forbearances, the loans, will continue to grow when you're in a forbearance. Death and disability. In the event you are totally and permanently disabled, or you pass away, as Jim was discussing earlier on the insurance section, the student loans go away. That is a nice assurance. As long as they are federal, they wouldn't get passed on to your spouse, children. These just are eliminated. And last of all there is loan forgiveness options for federal student loans, which we'll cover more. If you're in there's also a direct federal consolidation. So if you were graduating and starting your residency this year, that's something you should definitely look into, because it usually allows you to start repayment in July or August this year, rather than November or December when your grace period ends. Here's a number of federal repayment programs you need to be aware of. Standard repayment is a fixed 10-year repayment plan. Think of it like a mortgage over 10 years, fixed payments over a decade. Graduated is payments start out at a lower amount and grow every 2 years. It's over a 10-year period of time as well. Extended is fixed monthly payments over 25 years. Extended graduated similar to the graduated flavor, but it's over 25 years, where each 2 years that payment tends to increase. Income-driven repayment, or IDR. There are 4: income contingent repayment, income-based repayment, pay-as-you-earn, and saving on a valuable education. The 2 that are most applicable for you are SAVE and income-based repayment. ICR and pay are being phased out to new, those that are entering repayment right now. So, and that's starting this July. There's just a little bit of a mix-up. So know that you're probably going to have to decide on SAVE or income-based repayment if you're thinking about switching payment programs maybe later down the road. If you have federal student loans, please become an expert or hire an expert that knows and understands the nuances of those different repayment programs. Income-driven repayment programs have almost nothing to do with your interest rate. Payments have almost nothing to do with your debt burden, and they're based solely on your income and the number of people in your family. Here's an example of a resident who's making $60,000 per year. Let's suppose you're single and you're a resident, and we're trying to figure out, well, how much would my monthly payments be? Well, if you look on the first line there, they do take out a deduction that's called a poverty line deduction before they calculate your payments. So helps to keep it down a little bit more affordable. And you can see that as your household size potentially grows, that deduction increases. Similar to taxes, usually as your household size grows, you get a little bit of a larger deduction. If you have kids, there's child tax credits, those sorts of things. So if we look at line 1, look at ICR. It's a monthly payment of $750 a month. That's a lot of money. That's nearly unaffordable, especially if you're a single resident, right? Bringing in your $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000 a month. That's really hard to make. But if you look all the way over on the right-hand side, you can see SAVE. SAVE is about $200 a month, much more digestible. Let's go down to line 4. Say you're married and you have 2 kids and you're the sole earner in your household. In the SAVE program, you could have a $0 monthly payment. Income-based repayment and pay, you can see, are kind of in the middle there. And so for many of you listening today, SAVE is probably the best vehicle right now for repayment while you're in training. Loan forgiveness programs. Public service loan forgiveness. This is a very significant loan forgiveness track that we're going to talk about here in detail in a moment. IDR loan forgiveness, or taxable loan forgiveness, is where you enter a repayment program, one of those income-driven plans, for 20 to 25 years, and whatever the outstanding loan balance is at that time, they discharge it. But here's the catch. You're taxed. So let's say you owe $300,000 when you hit your 20 years. If you're living in a high income state, such as California, New York, you could be paying 50% in taxes on that. So after you've paid for 20 or 25 years, you could have a large, $150,000 tax bill. Okay, that's IDR forgiveness. There's a number of loan repayment assistance programs that are state-based, specialty-based. If you're willing to work in underserved communities, there is a plethora of those. So definitely look into that. And that can usually be a supplement to paying down your loans. There's military. If you serve in the military, they can help you pay your way for medical school. Or if you decide after that you want to go into military, well, there's a bunch of options there for you as well. The VA also has a very beneficial loan repayment assistance program that you can look into as well. There's the National Institutes of Health, NIH loan repayment program. For those that are looking for perhaps maybe some more of those research-oriented type roles instead of clinical, and sometimes there's a combination of those. And there's also the National Health Services Corp, NHSC loan repayment program. Those are a number of the big federal options that we see a lot of docs looking into to help pay down their loans. So public service loan forgiveness, or the lauded PSLF. This is the holy grail of loan forgiveness. This is the big one. It was created 17 years ago in 2007. There have been almost a million borrowers. So 900,000 borrowers as of April this year have reached forgiveness via this program. There's 4 requirements. Number 1, you need to be in a qualifying repayment program. That's one of those income-driven plans. ICR, IBR, Pay and Save. Payments in those payment programs are the vehicle to get you there. Number 2, you need to make 120 on-time qualifying payments. So you need a decade of work in public service. Number 3, you need full-time employment, or usually at least 30 hours per week at a non-for-profit employer. And that could be across multiple. And number 4, you need to be working for a 501c3 or a non-for-profit to qualify. In order to apply for public service loan forgiveness, there is an employment certification form that you fill out that just says, here's where I'm working and here's when I've worked, and you have your employer attest to your employment. Loan forgiveness in PSLF is tax-free. So if after the decade you owe $300,000, there's no taxes owed on that federally. And I think there's only one state right now that assesses state income taxes on loans that are forgiven for PSLF, and it's Mississippi. They keep changing that. But for now, there's no taxes owed on PSLF. Most residencies and fellowships are 501c3s, as are academic positions. But many doctors are working at non-for-profit hospitals and are not employees of 501c3s. Usually those types of positions do not qualify for PSLF. So something to keep your eye on. VA, military, CHCs, public health. These are some other examples of employers and places of employment where you can work and qualify for PSLF. So why does PSLF work? Well, you have low payments while you're in training, and generally the amount forgiven is equal to what you owed when you finished your graduate program for medical or dental school. PSLF is usually the best option if you qualify. And if you're wondering, I'm not so sure about this, what about the legislative risk? What about a change in presidency? Perhaps here we are in an election year. What about career risk? What if I don't want to work in public service? Or I start out in public service and I change my mind? That's okay. Set up a side fund. Set aside the money that you would have been putting into these student loans if you were paying them off aggressively over a 3 to 5 year period of time. That way, if you change your mind, it's not going to hurt you financially. So let's talk about private student loans. They're not as commonly used to finance your education. And recently, they changed the limits where you can borrow anything. You can borrow up to the cost of attendance, the sticker price for medical school, federally, whereas in the past, you may have had to use private student loans as a supplement. They're more commonly used after graduation when you're looking to private refinance your loans. Private student loans are not as eligible for flexible repayment or forgiveness provisions. You don't have IDR, you don't have PSLF, and it's a stricter death and disability discharge as well. It's one that you definitely have to look into the fine print. If your spouse co-signs on the loans, they can become jointly liable for this debt. So something to look at when if you're considering doing a private refinance. Private student loans are almost never discharged in bankruptcy, nor are federal student loans. So just be aware of that. As you usually follow any doc through a bankruptcy, I've seen it in extremely rare cases where they are discharged in bankruptcy. Private student loans come in variable and fixed. So if it's variable, that means when rates go up, they go up, and when rates go down, they go down. Whereas the fixed rates will stay where they are for the overall time that you have the loan. Interest rates are anywhere generally from 0 to 14%. Yes, they can be double digit. I have seen interest rates for private student loans at 18%, which is darn near credit card levels. And be aware, you're going to get correspondence from a lot of these private lenders out there. So private refinancing, there are some resident refinancing programs that allow for $0 to $100 monthly payments. Laurel Road, SoFi, Splash. Here's a couple of the big names that we see all the time. Many of these organizations that we partner with that can offer very reasonable monthly payments in training. Why would someone and it's an excellent option if you have private student loans to refinance your private student loans. Here's an example. Let's suppose you have $100,000 of student loans and they're a 10% interest rate. That's a monthly payment of $1,300. No, I'm not expecting you to pay that in training, but let's say you start doing that after and you pay it off in 10 years. The total amount you'd end up paying is $158,000. Well, let's say you were able to refinance the loans and go from 10% down to 6.5%. That would lower your monthly payment about $200 a month. But the big difference is over 10 years, you just saved $22,000 in interest, $2,200 a year. Pretty sweet deal. That's why a lot of people will private refinance their private student loans, because they can generally get a lower interest rate. Hold off on privately refinancing federal student loans and training until you are positive about whether or not you will do PSLF post-training. Let me say that one more time. Please hold off on refinancing your federal student loans and training if you are, until you're positive about your job post-training. There are a lot of docs who privately refinance their federal student loans prematurely. And once loans are refinanced, meaning converted from federal to private, you no longer qualify for federal programs such as IDR, PSLF, any of the federal protections. So just be absolutely certain that that's what you want to do if you're going to refinance your federal student loans. Let's talk about how to manage your student loans. There's two main paths for residents. Number one is just pay them off. Get them a standard repayment program. No, you're probably not going to be able to pay gobs and gobs of money while you're in training, but I'm saying when you finish your training and you start making $300,000 to $600,000, you can get through this very quickly. And sometimes you may want to look to private refinance as well if you can get a lower rate. Number two is loan forgiveness. But how do you pick a path? Well, the easiest measuring stick is looking at your debt to income. Debt of $300,000 and income of $300,000 is a debt to income ratio of 1:1. If your debt to income ratio or DTI is 1 or lower, meaning you make more as an attending than you owe in student loan balance, that's an option where you may be best off doing a standard repayment plan and perhaps refinancing. If your debt to income is 1 to 1.5, now it's going to look more favorable to do loan forgiveness and to do PSLF. And generally, the longer you're training, suppose you're specializing and you're going to do 5, 6, 7 years of training. The more years in training, the lower those payments are, and the higher likelihood PSLF is going to have more bang for its buck. Because generally, all of your time in training is at non-for-profits, academic, health centers, community-based organizations that are non-for-profits. And then if your debt to income is 1.5 or higher, you're almost absolutely certain that you'd probably be coming out ahead doing PSLF. But really, it comes down to your employment, post-training, which track to go down. If you're going to go into private practice, that's where someone would usually just pay them off. And if you're going to work at a nonprofit, academia, VA would stick it out with PSLF. Let's go over a quick case study. We've got a single emergency medicine doc who makes $65,000 for their 3-year residency. As an attending, they're going to make $300,000. They owe $300,000 in student loans, and they've got a 6% interest rate. Let's suppose for a moment here, they enter a standard 10-year repayment program. That's 10 years of payments, fixed monthly payments over a 10-year period of time. That's a $3,300 monthly payment. No, I'm not assuming they're going to start making those payments once they start their intern year. That's really hard unless you've got a significant other that can help pay the bills or you had money in savings from beforehand. But bear with me here just so we can try to get an apples to apples comparison here. If you were on a standard 10-year repayment program and you paid $3,300 a month, over 10 years, you're paying $400,000. It's about $100,000 in interest, okay? That's not uncommon. Well, let's say this doc is also interested in doing PSLF. While they're in training, they enroll into an income-driven repayment program. Their payments, their intern year, are zero. Their payments as a PGY2 are zero. Their payments as a PGY3 start to roll in, and it's going to be about $250, $260 for a couple of years. And then you'll see that once their attending income rolls in, that they'll have a monthly payment of $2,200. Okay, so a mortgage payment on these student loans. Well, over a 10-year period of time, this doc would pay $130,000 in total. And then the remaining student loan balance would go away. That is a massive difference when we're talking about purely from a payment standpoint. That's a difference of $270,000, and one that warrants every doc's consideration. And we're looking at this in a vacuum. Public service pay and private practice pay can be different, right? But in this situation, if PSLF is an option for you, definitely run the numbers and scope it out. Let's talk about a couple of strategies to lower the cost for your federal student loans and the payments. The first thing I want you to do, enroll into the SAVE repayment program. Payments and training are very affordable, and 100% of the accumulating interest after monthly payment is forgiven, and payments would qualify for loan forgiveness, assuming you got a qualifying employer, which most do. So if interest is $1,000 a month and your monthly payment is $200, the $800 of interest is waived, which means the loan balance at the time of graduation would never, ever be higher because SAVE helps subsidize the interest. Contribute to pre-tax retirement accounts such as 403Bs, 401Ks, traditional IRAs, 457s. These are some methods to lower your income or adjusted gross income. Student loan payments are based on your AGI. And so the lower you can get that, the lower your payments can be. For dual earning households, you should consider married filing separately to exclude spousal income. Let's suppose for a moment here on this table on the right at the top, your spouse makes $200,000 and you're making $60,000 as a resident. On $260,000 of income, that's a monthly payment of about $1,800 a month. Well, if you file separately, that would then base payments purely on your income and shield your significant other's income from consideration for payments. If payments are based off of $60,000 of income, that's a monthly payment of $200. That's a difference of $1,600 a month. That's a lot of money in training. And think about that over 3 years. I don't know, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 less of student loan payments can be very, very helpful, in particular if you're doing loan forgiveness. Last tip, you can file an extension on your taxes, and it will allow you to delay your income for up to 2 years. Suppose right now you're starting your PGY3 year in July. Well, it's time also to certify your income. If you filed an extension on your taxes that were due in April this year, it would delay the tax filing until October. Student loan certification is generally in May or June for most people during the year because you probably consolidated right when you graduated and started repayment in July or August. So usually right around tax time, you're also having to certify your income. Well, if you filed an extension on your taxes this year, you have to recertify in, let's say, May this year. It's going to use your most recently filed tax return, which will still be from 2 years previous. Your intern year when you only made a half a year's income. And this is a strategy that you could use each year going forward to help keep your payments down. And in this case, it could save this doc about $200 a month, or about $2,400 a year during their year in training, which is a nice chunk of change. Here's some takeaways. SAVE is a great way to kick off your repayment, whether you're doing forgiveness or whether you're just going to pay these off aggressively as an attending. Hold off on privately refinancing federal student loans until certain about your job after training. Private refinance private student loans early and often, and consider a public service job to do PSLF after training. Jim.
All right, I'm still here. Thank you so much, Andrew. You know, this is pretty amazing. We have 1,365 of you on this webinar. I think this is the biggest anything that the White Coat Investor has ever done. So I want to thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for spreading the word about White Coat Investor, for telling others, for bringing others onto this webinar. We're doing an immense amount of good. If we can save all 1,300 of you a little bit of money over the next 30 years, this could literally add up to millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in good that we're doing tonight. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I know it's, your time's limited in residency. It's hard. Some of you lost a patient today. Some of you made a mistake today. Some of you got yelled at today. And it's not an easy time of your life. And now you're dedicated an evening to spend with us and your financial future. So I thank you for that. A few things to mention at this point in the webinar. We probably got about 25 more minutes of presenting before we get into the Q&A. Our insurance guy wants me to let you know that as a resident, you can actually get up to about $7,500, not $5,000 in disability insurance benefit if you'd like to do that. But the reason we're doing this webinar is because we can't get out to talk to all of your residencies individually. I've spoken at residencies many times over the years, but it's really hard to do. Not only do residents not have the money, sometimes they offer me, we'll put you up in a hotel if you come out, but don't even want to pay for the airfare. But we just can't do it. There's too many residency programs around the country. And so we're going to do this once a year and maybe more often if we could really get this many people coming out to it. But we're also thinking about doing a residency book, specific to residents, distributing it just like our medical student champions program and having a champion at the residency and passing out a copy of this book that hasn't been written yet. I got to get around to writing the book, of course. But if that's the sort of thing you'd be interested in and helping with, please let us know in the comments. Speaking of the comments, that's where you leave your questions. As soon as we're done presenting tonight, we're going to answer as many of your questions as we can. I don't know if we'll get to them all. When I looked a minute ago, there were like 75 of them already. So get your questions in as early as you can if you want to get yours answered. But we appreciate you being here. All right, I want to talk a little bit about spending, right? Budgeting, if you will. You can see that in some places in this country, you can pay $9 for a gallon of milk. Hopefully not in your area of the country. But let's talk a little bit about what your income and what you can do with it during residency. The average resident salary this year is $63,000, $63,009. Interestingly, the median American salary is a little less than that, about $59,000 a year. And the median household income a couple of years ago, I don't have current data on that, is about $75,000 a year. So if you're struggling to live and to save something for retirement on your income now, how do you expect your patients to do this, right? You're not that poor, is what I'm saying. That said, residency is not actually the time to get rich. The key to physician wealth accumulation is what you do in that most important year of your financial life, that first year out of training. It's all about your attending salary, not necessarily what you do with your resident and fellow salary. But there are some good things to do with it while you're still in training. Okay, so here are some principles for budgeting for your spending plan. Number one, stop spending when you run out of money, right? Seems obvious, very important. If you don't do that, budgeting doesn't work. Two is to use a $0 plan, right? That means assigning every dollar in your budget something to do, right? There's no slush money. There's nothing extra. Everything's in the budget. The third principle, and I think this one's really important, is to spend last month's income, right? Get a month ahead. Katie and I do this. We spend what we made last month. So there's no question about what we're going to make this month. We know exactly what we're going to spend this month because we made it a month ago. So get a month ahead. 4 is to use your emergency fund, right? Typical recommendation for this is something like 3 months of what you spend. Use that to lower your deductibles on your insurance policies, but only tap it for emergencies, right? A trip to Hawaii is not an emergency unless your grandma that lives there just died, right? Tap it only for emergencies. Use sinking funds, right? This is stuff you pay for occasionally, but you save for each month. A classic example would be like if you pay for your disability insurance once a year, right? And it works out to be $250 a month. Well, you put $250 in there every month, and then you write one check once a year. That's called the sinking fund, and you can do that for your large expenses. But the main point of budgeting, spending, is to spend on what you actually care about. And that's different for different people, right? You might be more into travel. You might be more into cars. You might be more into your children, whatever. But spend your money on what you care most about. And when you're looking at things, be ruthlessly frugal with the stuff you don't care that much about. If you're not a car person, like I'm not really a car person. When I was an attending, I drove an $1,800 car. It was a Mazda 626. The AC didn't work. I didn't care. I just don't care about cars. I was spending my money on other stuff that I cared about. Use technology to assist you, right? There's some cool apps out there. You need a budget. Dave Ramsey's Every Dollar app. Use these apps to help you to budget. If you don't want to do it on pencil and paper, if you don't want to do it on an Excel or Google Sheets, use an app. It's cool, especially if you're working with a partner to do it. You can both have access to the app and know exactly where you stand during the month. Be flexible about your categories though, right? It's the totals that matter. If you spend a little less on household this month and a little more on groceries, that's okay. You can shift some money between those categories. Now, the most important thing about budgeting is to give yourself some grace. Most people screw this up at least the first 3 months. I would say typically it takes you about 6 months to get into a rhythm. But embrace your true expenses, right? What things really cost, not what you wish they cost, not what you'd hope they'd cost, but what you're actually spending on them, what they actually cost is the key to successful budgeting. Okay, enough on budgeting. Let's talk about investing. This picture of my friend Taylor jumping into a pool in a canyon not long ago. But let's talk about your best investments. Okay. Number one, don't leave part of your salary on the table. Okay. If you have access to a 401k, a 403b, you might get a match. A match means if you put dollars into the retirement account, your employer will put some other dollars into the retirement account. If you don't put money in there, your employer will not do that. It's basically part of your salary. So find out if you have a match. Ask HR for your 401k or 403b plan document and actually read it. Find out if there's a match and what you have to do to maximize it. So that's number one, best investment for residents. Number two, paying off debt. Okay. Paying off debt provides a guaranteed rate of return. If you got a 15% credit card and you pay that off, you're making 15% on that money, right? It's a great investment. You're not going to get that anywhere in the markets, right? You can buy treasuries right now at about 5%. Cash, you make about 5%. You're hoping with stocks, you'll make 8 or 10%. Maybe with leveraged real estate, you get your 10 or 12%. There's nothing out there that's going to give you 15%, much less guaranteed. So if you got debt like that, pay that off. The only possible exception is student loans. If the rate's subsidized to something lower, or if you're expecting potential forgiveness, you may not want to pay that off until you're sure exactly what your student loan plan is going to be. But all this other stuff, right? If you got some 9% mortgage, you got some 7% car loan, you got a 22% credit card, whatever, pay those off. Those are great investments, right? Long before you invest in anything else. Okay, and next principle to remember is to use retirement accounts. There's generally two varieties. The first one is a tax-deferred or traditional retirement account, and it comes in IRAs and 401ks and 403bs and 457bs and all kinds of different types. But generally tax-deferred, where you get the upfront tax break, it grows in a tax-deferred or tax-protected way. Then when you take the money out in retirement, you got to pay taxes on it. The other variety is a tax-free or a Roth account, where you got to pay taxes before the money goes in. Then it grows in a tax-protected way, and when the money comes out, it comes out tax-free. Because they both grow in a tax-protected way, they grow your money faster than when you're investing outside a retirement account. And they give you asset protection, meaning if, heaven forbid, you got sued for $1 gazillion and it wasn't reduced on appeal, this is very rare, right? But in the event it happened, you'd get to keep what's in the retirement accounts. So another great reason to max them out. The general rule of thumb is that residents and other doctors in their lower earning years, right? Not your peak earning years, residency, fellowship, early retirement, you're working part-time, if you're on sabbatical, those sorts of years, you should use Roth accounts. The main exception to that is if you're desiring to lower your income in order to minimize your student loan payments to maximize your PSLF. Okay. Sometimes in those sorts of situations, you want to use tax-deferred accounts because the benefit for your student loans will be greater than the benefit for your taxes. Okay, but here's a good graph. This comes from James Lang's book, and he demonstrates why you save in retirement accounts preferentially. The upper lighter colored graph is what happens if you save in retirement accounts. The lower graph shows what happens if you save outside of retirement accounts. Obviously, you want the top one, right? That tax-deferred growth doesn't make a huge difference in the beginning, but as time goes on, it can make a massive, massive difference and continue throughout retirement. Okay, as far as investing goes, during residency and fellowship, and maybe even afterward, just stick with a simple investing plan. Okay, most 401ks and IRAs offer what are called target retirement funds or life cycle funds. These are basically set it and forget it investments. They're very low cost. They're broadly diversified. They automatically adjust your investments as you move along toward retirement. They automatically rebalance for you periodically. And if you're investing in a 401k and an IRA and you decide later you don't want to be invested in these sorts of investments, there's no tax consequences to changing, right? You can change at any time in those accounts. There's usually no commissions and no tax costs. It's easy to change later. So go ahead and use those. They're not awesome outside of retirement accounts for various reasons, but if you're investing completely inside retirement accounts, especially during residency, this is a totally acceptable way to invest. If I could go back and do it again, I would invest solely in target retirement funds until I had a 6-figure portfolio. There's just no reason to mess around with 5 or 6 or 10 different mutual funds on such a relatively low balance. And I say relative to what you will have later. What really matters in early investing, when you're investing as a resident, when you're investing as a fellow, when you're investing as a new attending, is how much you put in the account. If you want more money for retirement, put more in the retirement account. Your time in the market matters more than timing the market. Getting a slightly higher return early on has a much smaller effect than just boosting your contributions. Earning more, saving more, putting more into the accounts, that's how you become wealthy. Okay, now a few words on investments. Generally good investments are low cost stock index funds, right? These are funds that just buy all the stocks rather than trying to pick the winners and losers, which turns out is really hard to do, especially after paying for the costs of doing so and the taxes that you pay when you're trying to do that. Low cost bond index funds, also good investment. Small businesses that you control. Some doctors will mention that their radiology center, their surgical center, their urgent care, their dialysis center is the best investment they ever had. Right? Those can be great investments, as can your own practice. As a general rule, bad investments are trying to pick your own stocks, right? If the professional mutual fund managers can't pick stocks well enough to beat the index funds using all the resources at their disposal, what makes you think you can do it, right? Speaking of which, don't invest in those expensive, actively managed mutual funds. Don't invest in whole life insurance, like I mentioned earlier. Now, there are lots of speculative investments out there. What do I mean by a speculative instrument or speculative investment? I'm talking about something that doesn't generate any earnings, doesn't pay any interest, doesn't pay rents, right? Basically, you're relying on somebody else to pay you more for it later than you're paying for it today. We're talking about things like gold, platinum, commodities, empty land, Bitcoin and other crypto assets, NFTs, beanie babies, right? This is my favorite picture on the internet. All of you guys are probably too young to remember this. This picture was taken in 1999 in divorce court. They were splitting up their beanie babies because they were so valuable at the time. Well, the next year, all the beanie babies were only worth $5. So it was obviously a silly exercise in retrospect. If you have to invest in speculative instruments, the most popular one right now is Bitcoin. If you have to, please limit it to less than 5% of your portfolio. All right, I talked about that. I don't know how that slide got duplicated. That one as well. Let's talk about the job hunt, right? And contracts. Many of you are in this right now or will be soon. There's a couple of problems with physician job hunting. The main one is you don't know what you want. And that's pretty typical for a graduating resident. Another problem is that most jobs now are employee jobs. So even if you don't want an employee job, you may not be able to work in the area you want to live in because the only jobs there for your specialty are employee jobs. Another big problem that you'll face as you go out in the job market is that you're at an informational disadvantage. The employer, the person you're negotiating with, typically knows more than you about the job market. However, you've got way more power than you think you do. Unlike the rest of the training pipeline, right? Getting into med school, getting into residency and fellowship, you've been competing against all these brilliant people and it's super competitive. And only 40% of people that wanted to got into med school. Well, as soon as you get out, that all goes away. Most physician jobs are not that competitive. They're begging you to come. They would love to have another GI doc or another neurologist. And if you're a pediatric rheumatologist, you write your own ticket, right? Because there's so few of you around. But that's the case for most doctors. Unless you want to go to like the best job in the most competitive part of the country, you'll be surprised how few people you're competing against to get that job. Okay, so the most important thing, though, that I can tell you is you need to know what you want. And that's super hard to do in training. I had a huge advantage. I spent 4 years in the military paying off the cost of my education. But while I was in the military, I got to manage a high volume, low acuity emergency department. I got to work in academics. I got to moonlight in a trauma center. I practiced medicine on 4 different continents. By the time I got out 4 years later and I went looking for my first real job, I knew exactly what I wanted. But most residents, that's not the case. I know because I interview them. They don't know what they want yet. They're asking silly questions when they come to the interviews. And that's why 50% of doctors end up changing their jobs within 2 years. They just didn't know what they wanted. And that's okay. You do the best you can. But the better you know what you want when you go looking for a job, the less likely you are to be in that 50% that will need a new one within a couple of years. Because so many docs change jobs early on, I encourage you to wait to buy a house until you know you like the job and the job likes you. That usually means renting for 6 to 12 months. And that's okay, right? People think renting is this terrible idea that you're going to be poor because you're renting. It's not the case. You know what makes you poor is having to move twice, right? Moving's expensive. Yeah. And you'd have to move twice if you're rented for 6 to 12 months, but it's not that bad, right? Especially if you're doing an in-town move. You can often do it in a U-Haul yourself. But there's serious disadvantages if you buy a house immediately, right? And the job doesn't work out. You have to sell the house, right? What does it cost to buy and sell a house? Well, about 15% of the value of the house. So if that's a $500,000 house, we're talking about $75,000. And it's not going to appreciate $75,000 in 6 months or 12 months, right? You need more time for that to happen. Plus, a lot of people don't realize they get richer every month. You're going to be in a better financial position in a year than you are right now, right? You'll probably buy a different house, maybe a better house, maybe a more expensive house, because you know exactly where you're at and what your budget looks like. You're just going to make a better decision on how much house to buy and which house to buy 6 months after you get there than you will flying in for 4 days to buy a house during a busy residency. So try to match the job to you and your interests. If you're going to be happy as an employee, get an employee job. If you need or prefer a job that qualifies for PSLF, only look at jobs that qualify for PSLF. But keep in mind that might require a sacrifice. You might have to go to a different area of the country. You might have to be an employee. You might have to stay in academics. You got to decide what you're willing to sacrifice in order to get PSLF. How much does partnership or ownership matter to you? When I came out of the military, it mattered a lot to me. It was really important. I only looked at jobs where I'd become a partner. It might not matter to you, but if it does, keep that in mind. Remember, it's easier to move out of academics than it is into academics. If you think you're going to spend some time in your career in academics, I'd encourage you to do that first. But the most important thing when looking for jobs is the people. The people matter more than anything. Make sure you gel with the people, just like in residency, that you're a fit, right? You don't want to be in a job with a bunch of toxic partners. And remember, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that you're going to care a lot more about controlling your work environment, about your lifestyle, and about your income halfway through your career than you do at the beginning. Okay, know how much you're worth, right? And have your contract reviewed. We have some recommended contract review firms on our website at whitecoatinvestor.com. You can go to the recommended tab. I think everybody looking for a new physician job should pay $400 or $500 and use one of these firms. They'll tell you what you're worth. That's worth the $400 or $500 right there. So you know what other docs getting jobs in your specialty in your area of the country are actually getting paid. They're going to explain all the terms in your contract to you. They'll help you know where you should focus your negotiations. And if you want, you can even hire them to negotiate for you. And I think that's fine if you're having to negotiate with the hospital CFO or something like that. If you're negotiating with your future partners, I think it's better if you talk directly to the docs. Okay, so understand your responsibilities if you leave or if you're fired, and make sure you pay special attention to the malpractice tail coverage, right? When you leave a job, if it's not an occurrence policy, if it's a claims made malpractice policy and somebody makes a claim after you leave and you don't have tail coverage, you don't have malpractice coverage for that claim. That's very bad. So you want to know that you're going to have tail coverage. So pay attention to who's going to pay for that in the event that you get fired, in the event that you just choose to leave, whether the employer is going to pay for that, whether you're going to pay for that, whether it's an occurrence policy, whether you're going to split it, pay special attention there. Pay special attention to non-compete and restrictive covenants. You've probably heard that they may be illegal soon. Okay? They're still legal today. And depending on how that rule and law eventually shapes up, they might be legal later. Don't sign one that you're not willing to abide by, because they do get enforced. They are legal, and there can be a big deal. If nothing else, they'll keep other employers from hiring you. They'll make you wonder if you can leave a job. So don't sign one if you're not willing to abide by it. Expect part of your compensation to be production or quality based, but especially in the beginning, try to minimize how much, especially if there's no data out there on how busy you're likely to be. The worst thing you could do is put 80% of your compensation based on your production and then find out that they're not bringing much business in the door for you, right? And through no fault of your own, all of a sudden you've got a 5-figure physician attending job. That's no bueno. One of my favorite phrases when negotiating is to simply ask, is that the best you can do? A lot of times they'll come up with a better offer before you ever even make a counter offer. So use that phrase. Remember that everything's negotiable, but the larger the employer, the fewer items are really negotiable. A lot of times they might not negotiate your salary, but they'll give you more time off, or they'll give you a larger CME fund. Find out what the person you're negotiating with actually has power to change in the negotiation process. Remember that the contract is just a written record of what you agreed to verbally. Okay, so it should reflect what you agreed to verbally. And if it doesn't, there's a problem. Make sure it does. Make sure that you're negotiating with the actual person who can make concessions to you rather than a middleman. Know what you care most about, right? Do you care about call? Do you care about parental leave? Do you care about a signing bonus? What's important to you? Focus your negotiation on those points. It may not be salary. For lots of people, it isn't. Okay. We have a new tool, the White Coat Investor. If you go to whitecoatinvestor.com/salary, you can compare your contract and you can compare your salary to others in your area and your specialty. We're doing that with one of our partners, Resolve. It's one of the companies that we partner with to help do contract reviews. That's a conflict of interest, by the way. They're a partner that pays us, in case that's not obvious. Okay, so last section we're going to go through before we get to Q&A, but I think it's the most important. It's a picture of me in Costa Rica, not making the transition to attending. I'd been attending for a long time by the time I went there, but I think it's a really important subject. Here's the most important part of it. Get yourself a written financial plan. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Okay. You don't want to happen what's going to happen naturally without a plan. At the beginning of this presentation, when there were 1,000 less of you, I showed a slide that demonstrated that 25% of doctors in their 60s are not millionaires, and 11 to 12% don't even have a net worth of $500,000. That's what happens naturally. If you don't have a plan, that's where you're going to end up 25 or 30 years from now. It's good to write it down. Okay, that means you can refer back to it. It helps you to stay the course in a bear market. And probably most importantly, when you write it down, it exposes the gaps in the plan, in your knowledge base. Then you can go fill in the gaps, right? There's 4 ways to get a plan. The first one is the way I did it. It's a do-it-yourself method, right? You go read a bunch of books, you come to White Coat Investor webinars, you participate on our forums or Facebook group or subreddit, you ask questions, you answer questions, you read the blog, you listen to the podcast, you become a do-it-yourself and you're like, I know enough to write my own financial plan. It's great. It's fine. It's the cheapest way to do it. It takes the most time and effort, but if you're a hobbyist, you can do this, right? It's not that hard. The second method is our Fire Your Financial Advisor course, right? And we got 4 versions of it. We got the student version. It's under $100. Got the resident version. Like I said, there's 20% off through June 7th for that. Go to whitecoatinvestor.com/FYFA if you're interested in that. We got the attending version, right? And then we got the version that offers CME, right? That costs a little bit more. But basically, that course walks you through the process of writing your own financial plan. It's not free, but it's way cheaper than paying a financial advisor. And basically, you're paying to have all that information collated and spoon-fed to you. The third method is to use an advice-only financial planner. You might pay this person something between $2,500 and $7,500 to help you write your own financial plan that you can then implement and follow. And finally, you can just hire a money guy, a money gal to take care of this for you. Get yourself a full-service financial planner who will also manage your investments. That's probably going to cost you $5,000 to $15,000 a year. Okay, but it does work. It's better to pay somebody that much money than to not do it at all. But it's obviously not the cheapest way to do it. Okay, I mentioned the Fire Your Financial Advisor course. This is how it works. You can upgrade as you go. Obviously, it's very cheap for those who don't make much money. It costs a little bit more for other people, but everything's 20% off now through June 7th. There's the code. Use lunch20 to get the 20% off deal. Like all our courses, there's no risk to you, right? 100% money back, no questions asked, guarantee for 7 days. If you've watched less than 25% of the course, we just give you your money back. Seriously, we will give you your money back. I will not rip you off. If you hate the course, we give back money to 2 or 3% of the people that buy it. It's no big deal. If it's not right for you, it's not right for you. But there's no risk to you if you want to check it out and buy it. Okay. We also have a recommended list of financial advisors, both advice-only advisors as well as full-service advisors. I've mentioned both of those to you. That's under our recommended tab at whitecoatinvestor.com. Okay, let's talk about your first year out. I told you earlier this was the most important year of your financial life. And in fact, if you tell me what you did with your money your first year out of training, I can predict the rest of your financial life with surprising accuracy. So what I want you to do, is to have a written plan for your first 12 paychecks. Not that hard. Just write it down. If you got a partner, work together with them to write it down. What you're going to do the first 12 times that $20,000, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 hits your bank account, what you're going to do with it. How much is going to go toward beefing up that emergency fund? How much is going to pay off high interest debt? How much is going to be used to replace that beater car you've been eking along for years? How much are you going to save up for a house down payment? How much are you going to use to max out retirement accounts? How much is going toward moving expenses or car loans or, Roth conversions of tax deferred accounts you had from residency or paying off your student loans or wedding or honeymoon or whatever? Write it down. If you'll do that for your first 12 paychecks, I promise you, you will be financially successful. Okay, some other things that you might want to do as a new attending. You probably need to increase your disability insurance. Most attendings are going to want $10,000 to $15,000 a month or so, maybe more if you're really highly paid and or you're a high spender. So increase that disability insurance. You can either get a brand new policy if you're still healthy and you don't have any dangerous hobbies. You can add the group policy from your new job. You can exercise that future purchase option on the policy you bought during training. You probably need to increase your term life insurance. A lot of you didn't buy as much as you need. You bought a 1 million and really you need 4 million. So buy a little more of that. It's probably time to get some umbrella insurance in place, right? This is liability insurance that sits on top of your auto and your homeowners or renters insurance to provide excess personal liability. Because remember, you can be sued for more than just malpractice. This won't help you with malpractice, but it'll help if somebody slips and falls on your property, or more likely, if your 16-year-old drives into somebody and hurts them. So buy some umbrella insurance. It's way cheaper than malpractice. It's way cheaper than disability insurance. It's even cheaper than term life insurance. Typically, most people will buy a 7-figure amount of that. $1 million or so is probably enough, especially for a new attending. Update your will. Most important thing in there, of course, if you have children, is naming who's going to take care of them and who's going to take care of the money for them in the event of your death. Make sure you update your beneficiaries as well, especially, when there's new family members or you get married or you get divorced or anything like that. Okay, here it is. You knew this was coming. It had to be in the presentation. There are now 1,575 of you who have seen the 4 most important words in this talk. Live like a resident. Live like a resident. This is the secret to becoming a wealthy physician. This is the secret of becoming financially independent midway through your career. Okay, what am I talking about? This secret to accumulating wealth rapidly as a doc is simply to continue living like you're living today for 2 to 5 years after you finish training. And you use that time period to deliberately and intentionally set yourself up for future financial success. It basically works like this. You earn like a doctor and you live like the average American household. And that should give you a huge difference between those two numbers that you can use to pay off debt and build wealth. Note, I did not say you should do this for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, right? And in fact, you don't even have to live like a resident, right? Give yourself a little bit of a raise. Give yourself a 50% raise. That would be huge in corporate America. Go from spending $60,000 to $90,000. What you're trying to avoid is a lifestyle explosion where you grow instantly into your new attending income with 2 new Tesla payments and a new, huge mortgage. And then you got to start making student loan payments. That's what you're trying to avoid. Here's how the numbers work. Let's say you're making $300,000 as an attending. Let's say you got a resident salary of $60,000, right? So you're now making $300,000 gross, $225 net. We gave you that 50% raise to live on. That's $90,000. That leaves you $135,000 a year, more than $10,000 a month. Does that work out to be? $11,000, $12,000 a month to build wealth. How fast can your $200,000 in student loans go away when you're throwing $10,000 a month at them? They're gone in less than 2 years, right? You wipe them out. You're done. You're done paying for med school. Awesome. 1,600 of you. That's awesome. I don't know if you got the time wrong or what, but more of you showed up as this thing went on. And those of you who missed the stuff at the beginning, we're going to send you the recording. You'll get an email with the recording. You can watch the whole thing, whatever you missed. You can play it in your car, whatever you want to do. I don't care. But here's what we learned tonight. We learned that financial literacy can make you a better parent, partner, and physician. We learned that you need to protect your income and your family with disability insurance and with term life insurance. We learned that you should get your student loans forgiven or pay them off rapidly by living like a resident. The importance of learning to live on a budget as a resident. The habits you put in place now, you'll carry forward as an attending and throughout your career. Get in the habit of investing something as a resident. Maybe you can't invest 20% of your income. I'd be actually pretty impressed if you could do that as a resident, but try to invest something. And if there's a match available, make sure you get it. Get the right job for you. Make sure you have that contract reviewed. Okay. Don't make the mistake lots of people make of signing a bad contract and really putting yourself behind the 8 ball early in your career. And have a written financial plan for your first 12 paychecks, and watch out for that financial services industry. There are plenty of people out there that just want to take advantage of you, that are not giving good advice at a fair price. We have obviously recommended tabs at whitecoatinvestor.com that can help connect you with the good guys in the industry. But you just got to remember that these people did not go into their professions for the same reason you went into medicine. All right, we're going to start taking questions now. And Andrew and I have steeled ourselves to be here for quite a while, answering as many of these as we can. There's 1,600 of you. I'm sure there's probably that many questions out there, but lots of them are the same questions. So listen carefully and we'll try to answer them and not repeat the questions over and over again. If we don't get to your question, you can email me, editor@whitecoatinvestor.com. 14 years I've been doing this, 13 years. And I haven't not answered a question yet from a real listener or reader. So you can email me. You can come by the website and search on the website. If you are interested in the topic, it's probably got a blog post or a podcast about it. Check out the podcast, check out the video cast. We've got communities, right? White Coat Investor Forum. We got a Facebook group. If you like Reddit, we're there too. It's actually our fastest growing group. We got the Financially Empowered Women. You should definitely sign up for that if you're interested. I told you about our deal for the resident course. There's the launch code, launch 20, gets you 20% off. And 100% money guarantee, 100% money back guarantee on that for 1 week if you're just not satisfied with it. All right, let's drop that down and let's answer some questions here.
And Jim, just so you know, I tried to answer a bunch of the student loan questions because there were so many. So we're going to start with a couple for you, and then I'm sure we'll just kind of be going back and forth.
Okay,
so
let's do it.
Let's start with this one right here. It's from Mangaro Mabuzi. Is there any difference applying for attending jobs in states with low taxes versus those with high taxes in terms of long-term financial standpoint?
Yeah, we use a phrase called, geographic arbitrage to describe this. The truth is, it's way easier in some parts of the country to build wealth than it is in other parts of the country. Okay. It's weird, but that's the way it is, right? You go to California and not only do you have high taxes, you've got a high cost of living. And a lot of times the jobs pay you less than you could make in Indianapolis or in West Texas or in Iowa or wherever, right? And so, yes, it does make a difference. Now, life isn't all about money. If your entire family and your partner's entire family is in San Diego, maybe going to Tennessee isn't the best idea, even if it might help your finances. And you've got to weigh all those factors, but there's no doubt that going someplace with no taxes or low taxes is going to help you build wealth faster than going to New York, than going to, DC, than going to, California or Oregon or whatever, any of these higher tax states. So definitely it does make a difference, but it shouldn't be the most important factor.
All right. Here is one from Cindo456. If I'm going to make an attending salary later this year, fall 2024, does this mean that I should not invest in my Roth IRA for 2024 since I will exceed the income maximum and should be doing a backdoor Roth?
Yeah. So for those who don't know what a backdoor Roth IRA is, this is the way attendings contribute to Roth IRAs because they make too much. They're not allowed to contribute directly to a Roth IRA. So they have to put it in a traditional IRA first and then move it to a Roth IRA. And that's called the backdoor Roth IRA. It sounds all sketchy, right? But the IRS is fine with this. I've been doing it now for 15 years straight, right? This is totally legal, totally legit. But the truth is anybody can do a backdoor Roth IRA. You don't have to be a high earner. So even if you don't end up having an income higher than the cutoff for that, which I think is about $200,000 for married and a little lower than that single, you can still do it. So there's no harm in doing it. If you're worried at all, your salary, your income might be higher than those limits, you should just do your Roth IRA contribution this year through the back door. The first year we did it, we actually didn't have to. We thought we were going to, but we didn't make enough. So I've been in your situation and it's fine. It's no big deal. So Backdoor Roth
Well,
IRA, there's a huge tutorial on the website. Just search Backdoor Roth at whitecodeinvestor.com. I will literally walk you through it. There's 3,000 comments and questions answered on that blog post. Your question is not new, I assure you.
and I'll just add there, Jim, if you're filing as a married couple separately to help keep your student loan payments down, you can't make more than $10,000. So they basically make it impossible
Yeah.
to do a Roth IRA and file separately. Because I
Yeah.
know there's a lot of residents out there that are trying to do this. Make sure you're doing a backdoor Roth in that case. Otherwise, you're going to be incomed out of it. So
yeah, that's a great point. That's becoming a more common student loan strategy. So if you're filing married, filing separately, it's not even 10,000. It phases out between 0 and 10,000. 10,000 is just the end of the phase out. So if you make $1, it's too much. So just do it through the back door if you're filing married, filing separately.
And then here's a little similar spin on this. Natalie, about to start an attending job, should I take 403B with my job offer with a 4% match versus a traditional IRA? Been doing a backdoor Roth IRA for every year. Now I can't do, a regular Roth IRA because I make too much money.
Natalie, thanks for what you do. That's pretty awesome. You've gotten through your training. I mean, it's a long road and you should be congratulated. Should you take your 403B? Sure. If they're going to give you a match, that's part of your salary. Why wouldn't you use that? So yeah, use the 403B, max it out. Maybe tax deferred's right for you. Maybe Roth's right for you. It's hard to say, but yeah, use that 403B as part of your retirement savings plan. You should also do a backdoor Roth IRA every year. Okay. You say, now I can't because our married income is high. That's not true. You just have to fund it through the backdoor process. First into the traditional IRA, then you move it over to the Roth IRA. That's all you got to do. It's not that complicated. So you'll max out the 403B. You'll do a Roth IRA for yourself and your spouse. If you need to save more than that, you can do it in a taxable account, or maybe your spouse has some retirement accounts. You piece it all together and make sure you're saving at least 20% for retirement, and off you go. You're off to the races. Before you'll know it, you'll be a millionaire. It's amazing how quickly it happens for doctors just following this simple plan.
All right, let's go to Samita, and she asked, how can I consolidate my residency and fellowship 403B into my new attending 401k?
All right, so this is one of those things, rollovers, right? This is one of those things that seems super intimidating and super complicated until you do it once. Then you're like, that's it. It's no big deal. Trust me, you can do this. You go to the new account, in this case, your new attending 401k, and you say, I'd like to roll over my residency 403B in there. And they go, here, fill out this form. And you fill out the form and you give it to them, and they pull the money over from your residency 403B. And 3 weeks later, it's in your new attending 401k. That's it. That's all there is to it. And you'll need to do this 5 or 6 times throughout your career where you're moving money between one account and another. And each time it's basically the same plan. Occasionally they come up with some other thing you got to do. You got to send them a letter or something. So you do that. But basically you go to the new plan and try to pull the money rather than pushing it from the old plan. That usually works a lot better.
And just keep an eye on it. I know that when I have switched jobs in the past, that one time I forgot about an old retirement account that was at an old employer, and sure enough, a check showed up in my inbox, and they're like, "Hey, now you got to pay the taxes on this," right? So definitely something that you want to be aware of with those rollovers. All right, our next one is a 2-part. It's from Corey. He says, my spouse just got a job that has a high deductible health plan with access to an HSA. If I am entering a practice that also is a high deductible separate plan with access to an HSA, does this mean we can contribute both contribute to an HSA separately, effectively doubling the amount we can contribute?
You didn't mention any kids. So the answer is probably no. Okay? The way this works is you basically get one family contribution you share between the family. You can put half in yours and half in your spouse's, or you can put it all in your spouse's or all in yours, but you get the same amount. There are sometimes some workarounds though if you have a kid, because remember the HSA laws define a family as two people, right? It can be a parent and a child. That's a family. You get the full family contribution. And so you can work around it sometimes doing that. But for the most part, you're going to get the same contribution either way. HSAs are cool. I love HSAs. It's the first contribution I make every year. Triple tax-free account. They're wonderful. But make sure you're following the rules on them.
This comes from Ramsey Abdul Rahiman. Do you offer a specialized program for IMGs who lack knowledge about U.S. finances, but are mostly a group of residents without student loans?
Yeah, we have a specialized program. We call it the White Coat Investor blog and the White Coat Investor podcast. You just skip all the episodes about student loans. Seriously, though, this stuff's all the same for IMGs as it is for everybody else. The truth is you feel like you're behind, right? But all the Americans don't know the stuff either. So don't feel like you're behind. Nobody got this in high school or college or residency. We're all starting at the same place. So don't feel too badly about being an IMG. You actually, as you mentioned, are a step ahead of lots of U.S. trained docs or U.S. Schooled docs because you don't owe $300,000 or $400,000 in student loans because your med school was free or paid for by the state or was cheaper or whatever. We do have a few posts that are specifically for IMGs on the blog. If you go to whitecoatinvestor.com and you search IMG, you'll find those, and I think you'll enjoy those. But the truth is, 95% of the stuff's all the same for all of us.
All right, here's a student loan one, and this is from Vetris. Is pay or save better for a fellow starting an attending job in the next year? I think save has a lower initial payment, but pay is capped at a lower amount when you have a higher income. This is a fantastic question. And this is precisely why student loan advice was set up, because this is one of those, you got to run the numbers. You need to look at the numbers here because there is, and a big point I want to throw out there, the pay program is no longer available to people beginning in July this year. So that means if you got into it beforehand, you can stay in that. But if you want to be in pay, you got to get into it before July this year. And the SAVE program is a great option, right, for a lot of you residents out there when your income's low because of the subsidy and because of the low monthly payments that it allots you. But as soon as your income starts to jump up as an attending, this is where it can get trickier. Save as you earn has no payment cap, meaning that if you're making, $800,000 as an orthopedic surgeon in a couple of years, you could have a huge monthly payment. Whereas with pay as you earn, payments are capped. And it's based on the standard tenure, which really think of it, it's about 1% of the student loan balance. So if you owe $300,000 in student loans, your payments would never go above about $3,000 a month. And the way to think about it is if you're going to be making significantly more than you owe, and you're going to, as an attending, and you're thinking about loan forgiveness, you're probably better off getting into pay or income-based repayment that helps cap your payment. Because at a certain point in time, there will be a discrepancy in those monthly payments. But here's the deal, too. You can't make the move into pay or income-based repayment after you have filed taxes on a full year's attending income, because the pay and the IBR plan require what's called a partial financial hardship, which generally means your student loan, your income has to be lower than your student loan balance. So that's where we talk a lot about making the transition from what was repay, now save, into pay or IBR before your attending income comes into play.
Now, the other reason people used to swap into pay was because they were going for IDR forgiveness. They were thinking about getting that taxable forgiveness at 20 years instead of 25 years like you would get under repay or IBR. I'm not sure how great that is now compared to just going for save for 25 years, though, with that extra subsidy. You want to comment on whether that's still a reasonable reason to consider swapping into pay before you finish your training?
Yeah. So, and I know, it's known well around here that we do not like 20 or 25 year forgiveness, right? But there are some situations where IDR forgiveness, the taxable loan forgiveness program, can work out for those of you that are going into private practice or working part-time or just have a huge amount of student loans and you can't work in public service. And what I have seen is that SAVE, with that interest subsidy that helps keep the balance from skyrocketing, is changing kind of the overall advice in terms of doing pay versus doing SAVE. And generally, I'm seeing a lot of people that perhaps would have been doing pay over 20 years are doing SAVE, because it can mean less monthly payments, but it can also mean if you're 5 years into this payment program with SAVE, the balance won't be any higher. Whereas with pay, and if you're making minimum payment, that balance is going to keep going up. So it gives you an easier exit should you decide, you know what, I'm not going to stick it out for the 25 years. So that's generally where I've seen. There are still a few use cases out there where I'll see people doing pay and doing the 20 years, but most are doing the 25 years in SAVE now.
Very interesting.
Okay. All right. Next one here is from Cynthia Lang. Are most people rolling their 401k, 403b from residency into their Roth IRAs after graduation? And if so, does this count to the $7,000 max contribution for the year?
Well, a few things. First of all, if you have contributed to a Roth 401k or a Roth 403b during residency, then yes, rolling that into your Roth IRA is typically a great move. I mean, there's a few states where you get slightly less asset protection in a Roth IRA than a Roth 401k, but for the most part, that's a no-brainer, right? I think what you're asking about, though, is doing a Roth conversion the year you leave residency, meaning you've got money in a tax-deferred 401k or 403b, and you want to do a Roth conversion. You want to pay taxes on it and move it into a Roth IRA with some of that newfound attending income. And that can be a great move for lots of people. Keep in mind, it can mess with your student loan plan, right? It's going to be more taxable income that year if you do a Roth conversion. So that could have an effect on whether you want to do that. And of course, you got to come up with the money to pay the taxes, right? You're going to have to pay some sort of taxes on that conversion. The only time you don't do that is when you convert, do Roth conversions during med school or something from a prior career. That can be a tax-free conversion, but that's water under the bridge for most people listening to this presentation. It's important to remember, though, that rollovers, conversions have nothing to do with contributions. You can do an $800,000 Roth conversion or rollover and still make your $7,000 annual contribution. They're totally separate. That contribution is not eaten up by rollovers or conversions. So absolutely, you can do both. Just keep in mind, if you're doing a Roth conversion, there's some tax consequences and potentially student loan consequences.
All right, now we're getting into a couple of insurance questions here, and we're going to start with Mark Chen. If you have a guaranteed standard issue through your residency, you're set up long-term, right? As long as you increase the policy as income goes up.
Yeah, so this could potentially be the only policy you ever buy, okay? As you're a resident, I think after you get a GSI policy in place, I think it's a good idea to see if you can get a fully underwritten one. Go talk to an agent, but maybe you can't. Maybe you got a scuba diving habit, or maybe you got, just got cured of testicular cancer last year or something. I don't know. If you can't get a fully underwritten policy, then just stick with the guaranteed standard issue policy. The only other issue you could run into is if you just can't increase it enough for your needs. You decide you need a $15,000 a month benefit and you can only increase it to 10. Well, maybe you need to look around for another insurance policy if you can get it. But people who are buying GSI policies, they're usually just grateful to have anything, right? Because they know they got a medical problem that keeps them from buying regular disability insurance. So potentially you are set. Potentially that's the only disability policy you ever buy. I mean, I bought one as a resident. I think the benefit was $2,500. I'm old, remember. I increased it after getting out of residency to $7,500. And then I had a group policy through my work. That was it. That was all the disability insurance I ever had. That might be all you ever need. Just depends on your needs and what options are available to you. But I'd encourage you to at least consider getting a fully underwritten policy. It's probably a slightly better policy. It's probably slightly cheaper if you're healthy.
All right. Here's another insurance question from Courtney P. If you have guaranteed issue, true own occupation, portable insurance through Guardian through residency, doesn't it make sense to apply outside that during residency and risk, or does it make sense to apply outside that during residency and risk disqualification, right?
Well, here's the deal. Let's talk about what the risk is, right? If you get a decline, you have to report that decline when you apply for disability insurance. But if you've already got the GSI policy, right, what's the risk? If they decline you, they decline you. You can't buy more. You've already got a GSI policy. What you're trying to avoid is trying to get an underwritten policy, getting declined, and then going to get the GSI policy. Because one of the questions they'll ask with the GSI policy is, have you ever been declined? And then you can't get it. So, but you've already got the GSI policy. So why not go look and see if you can get an underwritten policy? It might be a better policy. It might be cheaper. It might be a little better coverage, stronger definition of disability, more riders available, et cetera. Because the way these GSIs typically work is it's only one company for your institution, right? It might be Northwestern Mutual. It might be just Standard. It might be Principal. And maybe the Guardian policy is better for you, or maybe the Principal policy is better for you or cheaper for you. And so you could only get that with an underwritten policy. So I wouldn't say it's not worth shopping around after GSI, but that could be the only policy you ever buy.
All right, and then this was just a follow up for hers, for Courtney P. If you're healthy, what if the medical exam for those other big companies uncovers something you didn't know about and you get declined?
Well, I mean, there are occasional surprise declines. Like, I made the mistake of doing a really hard workout before doing my urine test for life insurance. And so I had a bunch of proteinuria, and he's got this kidney problem. Like, I just worked out hard before that. Let me just do it again. They said, okay, you can do it again. And I did it again. And it was clean. It was fine. Right. But things happen, right? I mean, you could be diagnosed with diabetes on your blood draw for your, life insurance or disability insurance exam. There is a risk there. Now, the nice thing is if you have a medical problem, they're going to find you want to know about it. The sooner you know about it, the better for your health. But that is a risk. I think it's a pretty low risk. But it is possible. And this is a reason why it might be worth getting a GSI policy in place before you apply for an underwritten exam, for an underwritten policy.
Okay. Here is a student loan question. This is from John Westberg. I was told my federal student loan servicer that although I applied and am now in the SAVE program, interest will not be subsidized because I am not current on interest accrued during medical school. Have you heard of this? And is this true? So it's my understanding that if you're in the SAVE repayment program and your monthly payment is not enough to cover the interest. For example, let's say your interest is $1,000 a month. That's how much the loan grows each month. And your monthly payment is $200. That $800 of unpaid interest would be waived. And so I think you may be getting some mixed guidance from your loan servicer. And I'm not surprised because I get emails all the time from clients telling me very contradictory things than what we chatted about on our consultations. So I don't know if this is right from them, but definitely keep an eye on the interest and make sure that subsidy is being applied, and it's supposed to apply each month.
Yeah, this is BS. I mean, who's current on interest from medical school? Nobody's current on interest from medical school, right? Nobody's paying loans during medical school. So of course you're not current on that, whatever that means. That's just BS. Here's the deal with these servicing companies, right? When you call these servicing companies, it is not Andrew picking up the phone on the other side. It is not a student loan expert. It's some guy that got hired 2 weeks ago, went through their little training program and got put in the phone bank, right? They don't know the answers to all these complicated student loan questions you ask them. And so they get them wrong a lot, and they tell you crazy stuff like this. The best thing to do when you hear something that you think is crazy is just call back and get a different representative and get a different answer. If you haven't got that answer from at least 2 or 3 people, it's probably not right.
Call it servicer roulette. You just never know what you're going to get. All right. Going back to some insurance question. All right. This is from BG Toma. Is there a certain amount of term life that you would recommend getting?
Yeah, you got to decide what you want the term life to do if you die, right? So I mentioned during the presentation, if you want it to provide for your spouse for the rest of their life, you're going to need a lot, right? Basically 25 times what you're spending, because financial independence is your insurance amount plus your nest egg should equal the amount you need to be financially independent to live the rest of your life, right? And if you don't have any nest egg yet, like most residents and fellows, it's all got to be covered by insurance. So that's probably some big fat 7-figure amount, 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, something like that. If you also want it to pay off a house, you got to add that in. If you want it to pay for your kids to go to college, you got to add that in. But there are very few people who need term life insurance who don't need at least $1 million. So typically docs will buy between $1 million and $5 million. The most I ever owned during my career was about 2.3 million. But I meet docs all the time who own 4 or 5 million. And like I said, I'm older now. I don't have any life. Well, I got a little tiny life insurance policy left that I'm probably canceling soon. I just canceled one of my life insurance policies this month. But at a certain point, you don't need it anymore, right? Once you have enough money that you can live the rest of your life off your nest egg, you don't need it. But in the beginning, you really need it. And the good news is that's when it's cheapest. It doesn't cost that much to have millions in life insurance when you're a healthy 30-year-old. It's pretty cheap. So get more than you think you need. You probably won't regret it. Certainly if you die, your spouse won't regret it.
Here's another insurance question from Brandon Noodleman. Any recommendation for 3 versus 6 month elimination period for disability insurance?
Yeah, 3 months is standard here. And remember, 3 month means 4 months because they don't pay you until the end of the month. You just don't get much bang for your buck going out to 6 months and certainly not going to a year. So just get the 3 month. Sometimes you can get a 1 month benefit, but you're giving up a lot to get that. So I wouldn't do that. A 3 month or 4 month, emergency fund is pretty standard for people to have, and that'll get you through until your disability insurance starts paying. Some people wonder about short-term disability insurance. We generally recommend against that. Use your emergency fund for that period of time. But 3 months is kind of the standard there.
This one's from Asen Mir. Wife is an attending. I'm a resident. Our financial advisor told us that he recommends whole life insurance so we can save more money in a tax-deferred account. Is this worth it?
All right. How can I say this nicely? You have mistaken a commissioned insurance agent for a financial advisor. You should not take financial advice from this person. They should be fired. You should never go back there. If you need financial advice, I would recommend you hire a fee-only financial advisor. We keep a list of them at whitecoatinvestor.com. Go into the recommended tab, financial advisors. Never buy any lifelong insurance policy without getting a second opinion on it from someone who doesn't sell it. As mentioned in the presentation, whole life insurance makes sense for almost nobody. It certainly is not a tax-deferred account. There is no tax break you get when you put the money in. You put after-tax money into whole life insurance. You buy it with after-tax money. And to tell a resident who probably has 10 better uses for their money than whole life insurance to buy whole life insurance is frankly what I consider financial malpractice. I hope that was pretty clear. No, it's not worth it. Don't go buy whole life insurance, even if your wife's an attending.
All right.
I mean, maybe you have some need for a lifelong death benefit, but you certainly didn't mention in that comment, some weird business planning reason, key man insurance, or, you're going to inherit $30 million and you have an estate tax problem and you're trying to work through that maybe, but not just because you're a doctor. That's not a reason to buy whole life.
Okay, here's another insurance. I can tell these all came up when you were talking about insurance. This is from Jessica, and there's a couple of parts to it. Jessica Geddes. Sorry, basically I am choosing between an individual policy without a future purchase option rider and a GSA policy. Which should I go with? She was approved for an individual policy without a future purchase.
Oh, that's interesting. Without a future purchase. Oh, that is a little bit of a complex question. I'm not sure I've ever gotten this one. So you can get either the fully underwritten policy, but without a future purchase option, or you can get a GSI policy with a future purchase option. I think I'd take the one with the future purchase option. I'm assuming you're a resident and you actually need that future purchase option, of course. I don't know what the price difference is between them, but what I do is I'd work with your insurance agent. I'd, put those two policies side by side and compare every, term in them, compare the definition, compare the riders, compare, the elimination period, compare every feature between them, the price, and then make an informed decision. Any policy is better than no policy. And either of these are probably fine. I do worry about you not being able to get more insurance later. I'm not sure why they would have sold you a policy but not been willing to sell you more. That's really weird. But insurance companies do weird things sometimes. So I assume you have some sort of medical issue that's keeping them from wanting to give you a future purchase option.
Okay, this one's from Urmi Patel. Can you enroll into SAVE plan early and skip the grace period?
It sounds like a student sneaking into the resident webinar.
I think there's a few in here that are getting a head start, and I love it. That's so much of the white coat audience, right? Is they're investing in their financial education, so you all can become better docs, right? So can you do this? Yes. What happens when you graduate is most of your loans are going to go into a grace period where this is a 6-month, think of it as a runway. So if you graduate in May, you probably wouldn't have to start making payments in November or December. This is problematic though, because during grace period, the loans are growing. And the second is that if you end up doing loan forgiveness, you want all of that time when you're in residency and in fellowship to be qualifying towards your 10 years. And any of that time in grace period does not. So consolidation, it takes your 8, 10, 12, however many loans, lumps them all together, and it allows you to move into repayment when you start your residency program. Otherwise, you can't start repayment early. So it gives you that ability to opt out of the grace period and start repayment. And it does ever so slightly change your interest rate. It goes up 1/8%. So nothing to stress out about. But I think the benefits of starting SAVE, getting some of that interest subsidy right away, and that the clock is starting for PSLF is a big win-win. Most of you should definitely be doing that.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, we're after Memorial Day. So a bunch of people that went to the student webinar a few months ago are now graduated from medical school. So maybe they're exactly where they need to be in the resident webinar.
Okay. From Catherine Campbell, is a SERP for a CEO a high commission product and a lot like selling whole life? And what is a ballpark average commission on something like that for the salesperson?
Yeah. So these names like SERPs, right? These are just other names for whole life insurance, or sometimes it's a different type of permanent insurance, like an index universal life policy or something like that. And they call it by these other names, so you'll think it's something else besides whole life, but it's not. It's just whole life. And yeah, it's a lot like whole life. The typical commission on a whole life policy is something between 50% and 110% of the first year's premiums. So if you're paying $30,000 for that product, the commission's something between $15,000 and $35,000. Now they might have to split that with their broker or their company, and they've got overhead too, right? But they're getting paid very well to sell these policies. Now, a lot of these come through your employer, right? Split dollar life insurance, sometimes it's called. And, and basically what's happening in this situation is they're selling your employer a whole life insurance product, right? That the employer's paying for part of and you're paying for part of. And you'd much rather just have more salary, or you'd rather have a bigger match into your retirement account or a cafeteria plan or some other benefit. But this is what they're offering you. Well, if they're paying for most or all of it, sure, take it. Why wouldn't you take it? There's some value to it, even if it's not something you'd buy on your own. So yeah, they're high commission products. They're products designed to be sold, not bought. But if somebody's buying it for you, someone wants to give me a whole life insurance policy, I'll take it. It's not like it hurts you to have it. It's just not a great investment and not great insurance.
Okay. This comes from Gregory C. If my partner makes very low income, $25,000, what is the sweet spot for filing jointly versus separately to minimize student loan payments versus benefiting from tax breaks?
That sounds like a classic 1-hour consult with Andrew.
Yes.
I mean, this is pretty much what you do all day, is help people run the numbers in these sorts of
It is. And it's married filing jointly versus married filing separately. It's save versus pay. It's extending my taxes out a couple of years to help keep payments lower, right? And there's, putting more money into retirement accounts, right? There's all these sorts of things around the edges that can make a big difference. But if we think about, how payments are calculated, they're about 10% of your take-home pay. So if this partner, they make $25,000 a year, that probably impacts your student loan payments about $2,000 a year. So if you're in residency, I think, yeah, definitely want to look into this, right? But it is almost always more expensive to file separately from a tax standpoint. So that is something that you're going to need to run the numbers on. And it's not rocket science. If you're both getting a W-2, you can run the numbers in TurboTax or TaxSlayer or whoever it is, jointly versus separately. And I wouldn't be surprised if the situation, maybe it's about a break even, but definitely would merit looking and running the numbers. Now, if you're making attending money already and you're making $300,000 and your partner's making 25, it's probably not going to make sense to file separately. I think the increased tax burden or liability that would occur to file separately would probably outweigh the benefits here. So,
yeah. But in residency, it could work out during residency to file separately. And I hate to recommend this strategy because it's a little bit gray ethically, right? But there's nothing that keeps you from filing separately now and going back and refiling in 18 months. You can file your tax returns again for the next 3 years. And you would not be the first person that decided to use that strategy to get the lowest student loan payments they could and then get the lowest tax bill they could. It turns out the Department of Education and the Treasury don't talk to each other. And, whether that's ethically right or not, I'll leave in your hands, but it's certainly a strategy that many white coat investors have used in the past.
And Jim, on that vein, when someone is looking to file separately and then amend taxes back to jointly to get the effective refund, you want to make sure that you filed the next year's tax return, right? We don't want them to look and say, wait a minute, you filed separately, but then you amended it back to jointly. So that's a good idea to make sure you've certified the next year. I also see where docs will get PSLF and then they'll get their loans forgiven, and then they will go back and try to do the amending of the tax returns. So
yeah.
So they've kind of cleared that slate. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it ethically, but I don't have to make that decision. I'm not the one with the student loans, so I don't know how I decided if I was.
Yeah. All right. This one comes in from Jenna Tancredi. I work at a large state institution that offers a 401a pension with a mandatory 8% pre-tax contribution. They also offer 403b and 457 plans without a match. Vesting requires 5 years, and if I leave before then, I only receive my contributions plus 2%. Given the demanding nature of the job, I would prefer to leave before 5 years. This looks like a speed pipe question here, Jim.
Is that all we got?
That's all we got.
There's no question here. All right, Jenna. I'm going to guess what your question is. Your question is,
here it is. Here it is, Jim. Should I continue
right,
contributing to a 401a, or would it be better to focus on maximizing out my Roth IRA and or 403b and 457b?
Okay, go back to the first slide. She gets 8%.
Yep.
Mandatory 8%. I don't understand if she gets to keep that or if she is just losing a match in the 403b or what she's losing. But here's the bottom line, right? You don't have a choice on the 401a, right? That's mandatory. So there's no decision to make. They're going to do that. You got a 403b and a 457b. Put money. I've never had a match, right? I've never had a job that matched anything I put into a retirement account. All the money in my retirement accounts is either money I put in there or money it earned. None of it's employer money. So I would still use retirement accounts without a match. I think they're great, right? And if you lose the match, you lose the match. I think you said it was 2%. Okay, well, that sucks, but that's the cost of leaving the job. Maybe the new job will be much better. And so it'll be worth it. Actually, you get to keep 2% of the match. I see what you're saying. I think what you're saying is the 401a, you don't get any growth. You only get 2% growth if you leave before 5 years. That's what I think you're saying. But if it's mandatory, it's mandatory. You don't have a choice not to use it. but I typically would do a Roth IRA before I did a 457 most of the time. Would I do it before a 403b? Well, that's a little more of a it depends kind of question. But I don't think you can get out of the 401a. So what does it matter? If you have to put the money in, you have to put the money in. Even if you'd rather put it in a Roth IRA, you don't really have a choice. So if they gave you a choice and you thought you were only going to get 2% earnings on it, then yeah, I'd probably use the Roth IRA over that. But hopefully you can just do all of it, right? I mean, ideally you're maxing out all these accounts. Hope that helps, Jen. I don't know if I answered your question in there or not. If not, email me, editor@whitecoatinvestor.com. That goes for the rest of you too. You can email me questions anytime. I usually get back to you within a week.
All right. This one's coming from Ana Paula Rojas. What kind of car insurance would you suggest for residents? Med school told us to get full coverage and the highest premiums in pretty much all of the categories.
So your med school's giving out financial advice. How's that going for you? Here's the deal, right? I mentioned earlier that I drove an $1,800 car as an attending. I did not have full coverage on that car, right? It's $1,800. When you get $15 or $20 or $25,000 dropped into your bank account every month, you don't need the insurance company to replace your car if you wreck it, if it's a $2,000 car. So when your car's not a big deal, if you wrecked it, you don't need full coverage. You can just have liability coverage. And in fact, I think most people don't carry enough liability coverage. For example, some states, the minimum is only $25,000 or $50,000. That is not enough. If you hit me in my truck and you only got $25,000 of coverage, you're not going to be able to repair the truck, much less any injury you might cause, which you probably won't because it's a big truck. But, that's the way it works. So I would spend more money on liability coverage. I'd get $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in liability, maybe stack an umbrella policy on top of that. That's the most important part of your auto coverage. Now, if you've got a nicer car, that replacing would really be, a financial hardship. You're a resident, you got a $25,000 car, you might want to have full coverage. It's probably worth it. The other benefit of having full coverage is when you travel and you rent a car, you don't have to pay their ridiculously overpriced insurance from the rental car company. You say, I got coverage. As long as you're in the US, that works. Occasionally it'll work overseas. Most of the time overseas, I've had to pay for the rental car company coverage. But in the US, I just use my USAA coverage that, is full coverage on our vehicles here. So no, I don't think you need full coverage. I don't think you need the highest premiums. You just got to make that decision as you look at your needs and your situation. And obviously keeping premiums down by having a big emergency fund is generally a smart personal finance principle.
All right. This one comes from Danita Lindsay. For PSLF, would you still qualify if the 120 payments are interrupted? For example, you worked at a qualifying institution for 5 years and then you come back. Yes, you can do this. I don't usually recommend taking a 5-year hiatus and then going back to PSLF, but stranger things have occurred. Okay. It is 10 years of cumulative payments. So say you did 5 years for training and you worked in private practice, or maybe you took 2 years off. I don't know, for kids or family reasons or whatever. You can pick back up right where you left off. Just know that all the while you probably increased the amount that you had to pay for your student loans. So the decision whether or not it makes sense to opt out of that employment temporarily that's public service is a very personal decision. But yes, you could go back. And I have seen this. I see this a lot with dual doc couples when one is going to work very part-time for a year or two when their kiddo's little, and then they go back to work more full-time and just pick right up where they left off to hit their 10 years.
Yeah, certainly this shouldn't be something you feel like if you leave that institution, you can never start again, right? If it makes sense for you to get out of there and go try a private practice job or go part-time, go do it. PSLF doesn't go away. You can always go back and qualify for it. Just recognize that you're not going to qualify for it if you leave a qualifying job and don't go to a qualifying job.
And I'll also add that if you have been in an extended training period, maybe you did general surgery and you did 5 years of training, and now you're going into private practice and you start out in a private practice, maybe just feel it out to make sure it's a good fit. I had a client pretty recently who was in a situation where they joined a private practice right out of training and thought, there's no way I'm going to go back and do PSLF. And they were there for 6 months and they sold them a bill of goods. And they're actually now leaving and going back into a public service institution. And those couple of months that they were working in that private practice, they were just throwing gobs and gobs and gobs of money into their student loans. And now they're feeling that buyer's remorse, where they could have, kind of felt things out and made sure it was a good fit. So I know this is not, it's a bit of a generalization here, right? But just make sure that the job that you're taking is a good fit, because I know that maybe the numbers better on this, Jim, but I think it's 30 or 40% of attendings will leave their first job in like the first year that they're there. So
yeah, that's probably about right. It's 50% in 2 years, but I don't know what it is the first year. Yeah, it's one of those things. The right thing to do, of course, is to pay down your debt, right? But there's this moral hazard. That's not a moral term, right? That's an economic term that comes from these super generous federal student loan programs that causes people to do weird things. Like now students are asking me, should I use my money to pay for med school or should I take 9% loans? And the right answer right now is probably take 9% loans and just keep your money invested. And I hate that that's the right answer. But it's just SAVE is super generous. PSLF is super generous. I don't know if they'll last in their current forms, although I think if there's any changes, those of you in it will be grandfathered in. But they're really generous programs, and so you want to make sure you're not going to need them or want them before you exit them.
Yeah. All right. This one comes in from Michaela Klein. Is it better to contribute to post-tax Roth accounts to capitalize on the low tax rate during residency, or contribute to pre-tax to lower your student loan payment and capitalize on interest savings?
Yeah, the answer to this is it depends, right? Like so many other questions in personal finance. If we're just looking at the retirement accounts, Roth and residency is the right answer, right? Because you're in a low tax bracket. Now you got this tax-free pot of money. It's going to grow tax-free for the next 50 years before you start spending it. And, and that's just an awesome, awesome thing to have. But now you're weighing that against the possibility of having lower student loan payments, which give you better cash flow, right? And potentially, if you're going for forgiveness, having more money forgiven. And so it's hard. You got to run the numbers and you got to insert some assumptions and so on and so forth. I would say if you're going for PSLF, you're pretty sure you're going for PSLF, it's probably worth it most of the time to give up on those Roth benefits to get more money forgiven via PSLF. If you think you're probably not going for PSLF, and the only downside here is that you're giving up a little bit of subsidy on the SAVE and you got a little bit more of a cash flow issue during residency, then I would say do the Roth accounts. But you got to run the numbers. I mean, we literally got so many questions like this that we could not answer in a quick way on the podcast or in an email or something, that we started a company to answer these questions. It's called studentloanadvice.com. Andrew is the main founder of it. And this is all he does all day, is meets with people for an hour, looks at their numbers and helps them make decisions like this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough question. And I think I tend to lean doing the pre-tax contributions while you're in training, because there also might be some sort of match that your employer's offering as well, right? And at least trying to do that. But starting your savings in training is so great, right? Because we know it's not easy, but even just starting to build that habit is a great idea.
Yeah, if you're getting a match for doing pre-tax, that's a different question. If the employer's offering a 403B with a match and and they don't offer even a Roth 403B, although most of them I think now are, then that would definitely sway the decision. Mm-hmm. Don't leave your salary on the table. That's what missing out on a match is.
So this one's coming from AYTA 1010. Are there...
This one's for you. I don't know the answer to this.
Are there loan repayment strategies and programs for students that are in Canada? So I do get questions from docs that went to medical school in Canada that have moved to the US. and I am not an expert in all the Canadian student loan stuff. I do know the U.S. student loan system. I try to know that inside and out to help you out. But when it comes to Canada, I don't really know much about it. I know that if you are a Canadian citizen and you're borrowing for medical school in the US, sometimes you have to take out private student loans instead of federal student loans. So I can at least speak to, if you have private student loans, you definitely should be looking at refinancing those, because there's a very, very high likelihood that when you are borrowing those loans for medical school, your credit situation is a whole lot different as a resident, and will be very, very different when you're an attending doc. So
Yeah. I don't think there's a Canadian equivalent of PSLF, though, which is the big dog in the room when it comes to U.S. federal student loan strategies. When you take that away, most of the time you end up paying off your student loans. So if you can get a lower rate, refinance them, pay it off, that's probably the angle I would take. But I'd do more searching. We're not Canadian experts when it comes to tax law or retirement account rules or student loan strategies. So you'll need to do a little more research there. Same with New Zealand, Australia, the UK, as well as the non-English speaking world. I just can't keep track of 100 different countries and their rules.
So this comes in from Dr. Elizabeth Kazarian. Please explain Roth IRA to backdoor Roth IRA transition.
Okay. Before 2010, there were 3 rules that affected high earners and IRAs. The first one was that high earners couldn't directly contribute to a Roth IRA. The second rule was that high earners that had a retirement plan at work could not deduct a traditional IRA contribution. And the third rule was that high earners could not do Roth conversions. They could not move money from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. That all changed starting in 2010. But only the third rule changed. The first 2 remain in place. So high earners are now allowed to do Roth conversions. They're allowed to move money from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. So starting in about 2008 or so, when they announced this change in the rules, people started talking about the backdoor Roth IRA. And all that was putting money into a traditional IRA, not getting a deduction for it because you earn too much and you have a plan at work, and then moving it to the Roth IRA. You can't contribute directly to Roth IRA because you make too much. You can't deduct the traditional IRA contribution, but you can put a non-deductible contribution into a traditional IRA and then moving it to a Roth IRA, which doesn't cost you anything in taxes because you didn't get the deduction up front. That's all the backdoor Roth IRA process is. It's a 2-step contribution to a Roth IRA rather than a 1-step contribution to a Roth IRA. Now, the only complicating factor, and I hate to even mention it because the rest of it is so simple, is that there's a pro rata calculation on the form that you report this transaction on to the IRS. That form is Form 8606. And you have to file it if you make non-deductible contributions to traditional IRAs. And one of the lines on that form asks you how much you had in a SEP IRA, simple IRA, or traditional IRA as of December 31st of the year you did the conversion. And you want that number to be 0. Because if it's not 0, that conversion gets prorated. And while proration isn't illegal, it kind of defeats the purpose of doing the backdoor Roth IRA. And so you don't want to get prorated. So if you have some other traditional IRA or SEP IRA or simple IRA, you want to do something with that before or about the same time you do this backdoor Roth IRA process. But other than that, it's a 2-step process. Money into the traditional IRA, move it to the Roth IRA. That's it. Backdoor Roth. I do the first step on like January 2nd each year, and I do the second step on like January 4th each year. It's just not that complicated. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of doctors just like you and me doing this every January. And that's our Roth IRA contribution for the year. You can do it for yourself. You can do it for your spouse based on your earnings. And that's the backdoor Roth IRA. You're muted, Andrew.
There we go. This is coming in from Lacey. I'm going back to residency after completing a residency 4 years ago. I'm in repay. Would you recommend switching to save during residency? And can I put my residency salary in when I apply for save? Wow. So sounds like, Lacey, you're doing 2 residencies. That's cool. Uh, you're probably in the save plan.
He says
Repay.
the guy who hasn't done a residency says it's cool. That sounds like a lot of hard work to me.
Well, I see it. I see it every now and then that
Yeah.
people wanted to change their mind. They were a
Better to do what
psychiatrist
you want
and
to do for sure. Life is long, and if it costs you a few more years in residency, it's worth it. But I think a little
yeah,
bit of condolences are in order to think about being a resident twice.
yeah, yeah. So your loans are probably already in save because if you were in repay previously, they just changed the name and now it's save with a couple of features. And one of the features is instead of a 50% interest subsidy on unpaid interest, it's 100%. Also, it allows you the ability to file your taxes married filing separately and exclude spousal income, whereas in the past, repay did not allow that. That was another big reason why a lot of people would pick pay an IBR because it did allow you previously to exclude spousal income through filing separately. So now save allows that benefit as well. And can you put in your residency salary? So you're probably going from making more money now as an attending to now going back into residency, right? And there's some sticker shock to that. Can you afford those $2,000 to $3,000 monthly payments? I don't know. So what you do is as soon as you have your offer letter in hand, or really when you start your residency here, and I'm assuming July, you can recertify your income and let your servicer know your income has gone down. And you could use your employer offer letter that says you're making $70,000, right? And then that's going to allow you to immediately lower your payment because payments are probably based on, a year or two ago, maybe even further back, right? Because of all of these pauses on income certification that's taken place because of the COVID pause. And I'd assume that should help you get a much lower payment while you're in training.
Yeah, but I think the elephant in the room to talk about here is this is an awesome setup for PSLF, right? I mean, you already did a 3 or 4 or 5 year residency. Now you're going to do another 3 or 4 or 5 year residency, right? You got to be pretty darn close to 10 years of PSLF qualifying payments. If you haven't, made the mistake of putting them in deferment or forbearance or something, you might get PSLF before you even get out of training here, which would be pretty awesome. So make sure you're checking those boxes. I think PSLF is probably a great option for you.
This is coming from BG Toma. When looking at a 401k, should you consider investing in the Roth 401k instead of a traditional one?
Yes, you should consider it. That doesn't mean it's the right move. This is actually a really complicated question. There are a lot of factors that go into this, but the main one is comparing your tax rate now to what your tax rate is likely to be on those dollars when you withdraw them in retirement. And if it's likely that you're going to be withdrawing them at a higher rate than you would get a benefit on for contributing to a tax deferred account now, then you would want to do a Roth. If it's likely to be a lower rate, like it is for most attendings in their peak earnings years, then you'd want to do a tax deferred or traditional contribution now. I have an entire lengthy blog post with many questions and answers below it. If you search Roth versus traditional at the White Coat Investor, you can read many articles discussing this, very complicated subject.
Okay, here's another question. This one's coming from Aaron D.
I just want to interrupt for a second, Andrew. We now have 1,700 people on this. We didn't even have 1,700 people on this webinar when we were presenting. People are just coming for the Q&A now. So welcome to all of you who missed the presentation. We're glad you're here. It'll be recorded. We'll send it to you. You can watch the presentation if you want, or you can just hang out and ask questions. We'll hang out as long as we can. My shift doesn't start till 6 tomorrow morning. So maybe we're here all night.
All right. So let's say you have, this is from Aaron D, a $200,000 loan from family, no official interest rate or repayment schedule. What's the most tax advantage way to pay them back? You want to take a stab at this one first, Jim?
I love the creativity, right? First of all, loan is in parentheses. Keep in mind the IRS has rules about loans, right? You need to actually have documentation on loans. You're required to pay a certain amount of interest on loans, or the unpaid interest is considered a gift. Now, you could run into gift tax rules if there's a lot of unpaid interest each year that's more than the gift tax amount, right? But if this thing has no interest rate and it has no repayment schedule, it's not really a loan, is it? This sounds like it's a vague something in the family, maybe some gift, maybe whatever, maybe you'll pay it back, maybe you won't. If I were the person who loaned you the money, I'd be a little worried that you're not going to pay it back, but you don't seem worried about that. It sounds like you're actually going to pay it back. But it doesn't sound like it's actually a loan. It sounds like it was a gift and you're gifting it back. So gift tax rules will apply, but as long as you're not gifting more than $18,000 a year, that shouldn't be a big deal. I guess the question is, if somebody started asking about these transfers you're making between family members, what you're going to tell the IRS that they are, whether they are gifts or whether they are loan payments. If they're loan payments, they're going to ask, where's the loan paperwork and where's the, record of the interest being accumulated and paid? And if they're gifts, they're going to start asking, well, where's the gift tax return that you're supposed to be filing each year? So, lots of families do stuff like this. I think most of it's honestly done kind of under the table. And when you're doing something under the table, why are you expecting some sort of a tax advantage for it? All right. Now, it's a super cool question because I like thinking creatively, and I can think of a few creative ways to get a tax advantage for doing this, right? So here's one of them. If you end up with an estate tax problem, you could, by giving this money, paying this loan back, you could lower the size of your estate, and that could reduce your estate taxes. So that's one way this could help you. Probably not an issue if you've still got student loans. So you probably don't have student loans and an estate tax problem. But another thing you could do, if you had appreciated shares of stock in a taxable account, you could give those to the person with the loan, and then they could sell them at their lower tax rate. And maybe the family pays a lower amount of tax overall. But if you're looking for some, IRS deduction on family loans, especially when there's no interest being paid, it just doesn't exist. And the truth is, if you were going to establish interest, so you could take the student loan deduction, which probably doesn't apply to most attendings anyway, the person receiving the interest would have to report the interest to the IRS, which it doesn't sound like is actually happening here anyway. So I wouldn't go looking for a big tax advantage here. I'd just pay back your family member, tell them thank you very much, and maybe not worry about whether it was a loan or a gift. I don't know that anybody cares too much on a just $200,000 transfer. That's probably going to take place over several years.
All right. This comes in from Sierra Greashears Smith. Is it a good idea to start paying on student loans as a form of investment in residency? For context, just graduated, $350,000 in private student loans before the school was accredited, plan on refinancing. First, I'm sorry. This is tough. Having to borrow before your school is accredited is definitely a tough situation, and I know that's the case a lot of times when medical schools are just starting up, okay? Because you just don't have a ton of flexibility in terms of the way to pay the loans down. Now, in terms of the approach on how to pay these, I think the first thing you want to do is, can you get a lower interest rate to private refinance? Because those interest rates on those private student loans could be double digits. And I'd assume your credit situation and, you're making some money now, will be soon here as a resident, you could probably get a lower interest rate to private refinance, and you could get that $100 monthly payment refinance deal. So that's the required payment. But what I would do is, if it's a 6 or if it's a 7% interest rate, that's a great investment on those dollars. That's a guaranteed return of 6 to 7% that you can't get a guaranteed return like that in the market. And so I think,
and if they're 12% loans and they can't get them refinanced, that's a 12% guaranteed return.
Yeah. So definitely it sounds like it's a good investment, whether you can refinance or whether you can't. But definitely try to check that out, as rates could change over time and could potentially get better.
Yeah.
So
yes, a million times yes. This is a good investment for you. All this stuff we're talking about with student loans, with federal student loans, are people that are getting free money. right? They're getting free subsidy on their interest in the SAVE program. They're potentially getting IDR forgiveness, or more likely PSLF forgiveness. There's no free money coming to you, right? There's no private student loan ferry out there. You're paying these suckers back, so you might as well get started. If you got spare cash, yeah, this is a great investment. You know, a Roth IRA is a great investment. Putting it in your 403b is a great investment. I'd probably get my 403b match before doing this, but this would probably be my second investment that I did as a resident.
And there's a great graphic. I don't have it pulled up here, but I know there's a waterfall of how one should contribute money to retirement and IRAs and Roth and all of that jazz is on it's on the blog. And so you can look that up for waterfalls for residents. And there's even an attending version that can also help you when you're trying to kind of position and target where to start putting those dollars to work.
Yep. Just search waterfalls. That search box at whitecoatinvestor.com is super useful. I use it like 10 times a day to find articles for people to answer their questions by email. So use the search box. We actually pay for every search done on it, but I'm willing to pay for it because I think it's so useful.
Okay, here's one from Theoretical Fallacy. Do we have any negotiating power on contracts with hospitals, large corporate-owned healthcare systems? Their recruiters tell me a lot of offers are take it or leave it.
Well, here's the deal, right? In any negotiation, the person with the most negotiating power is the person with the best BATNA, BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement or to no agreement, right? What is your BATNA? Do you have another job you like just as much down the street that's going to pay you $5,000 more? Well, that's a great BATNA. If they're not going to play ball, you just walk out the door and you go take that other job. On the other hand, they might have a great BATNA. Maybe they've got another applicant that's just as good as you that they're willing to take. And they're like, this guy's willing to take this job for $350,000. If you don't want it for $350,000, we'll just hire him. And that gives them the better BATNA. So you usually have more power than you think. But what happens with a large employer is the person negotiating with you is not going to have a totally different contract for every person they hire. They got to hire 120 people this year or whatever. You know, they got to hire 17 people this year. They're not going to make a totally different contract for everybody. They're trying to get something standardized so that it's not, you know, changing all over the place. So what you'll find is they're willing to negotiate some things, but not others. You know, for example, salary might be hard, but signing bonus probably isn't. You know, they've probably got a lot more flexibility in how much they give you for a signing bonus, or they might have more flexibility in how much time off they can give you, or a lot more flexibility in how much CME money you can get, or in how much, help you have in your clinic. You know, you get an extra MA or something. And so you can almost surely negotiate something to make the deal sweeter. But if they really do have a better BATNA than you, it might be a take it or leave it offer. And welcome to the world of negotiation. You should have applied to more jobs so you had a good BATNA too.
All right, this comes in from Dr. Benjamin Gifford. Is there any way to protect your signing bonus from taxes? For example, place directly into 401k or retirement account? I'm going to say probably not, unless there's some creative tax strategy, right?
I think the best way to protect your signing bonus from taxes is to get it earlier. If you can get it not in your last 6 months of residency or fellowship, right? Now it's being taxed at probably a lower tax rate than it is if you get it in that last 6 months, right? The year that you're going to have an attending salary for half the year. So that's probably the best way to protect it, is to get it a little bit earlier. If you can make tax deferred contributions into an HSA, into your residency 403b, into a traditional IRA, I guess, but some downsides to doing that, then I guess you could help protect it from taxes that way. But what gets a lot of people is bonuses are paid out all at once. And so a whole bunch of it is often withheld for taxes because of the way that the withholding tables work, the instructions the employers get from the IRS to withhold money. And so in reality, they pull a whole bunch of money out and withhold it for taxes that you're not actually going to have to pay in taxes. And so part of that signing bonus probably comes back to you when you get your tax refund next April. So it's not as bad as it probably looks at first if they're automatically withholding, whatever, 30% or whatever from your bonus. It's probably not as bad as you think it is. You're just not going to get that money for a little while. And you could change your withholdings at your main job to account for that if you like. So you're having less withheld from your regular paychecks and more gets withheld from the signing bonus. Just be careful you don't get too far out of the safe harbor and end up having to write a check that you can't write next April. But they probably won't let you put it into your new 401k. I'll tell you that. If you're getting a signing bonus, you're probably not even eligible to contribute that for a year.
All right. This one comes in from Ken H. HSA better than Roth IRA if available during residency?
Hard question. It depends what you want the money for, right? If you're going to spend it on healthcare, HSA is better. If you're going to spend it in retirement, Roth IRA is generally better. But HSAs are really cool accounts. They're triple tax free. You get the tax break when the money goes in. It grows tax protected. It comes out tax free if you spend it on healthcare. You can invest HSAs, right? Even if your crappy employer's chosen HSA isn't very good, you can do a rollover periodically and open one at Fidelity or Lively and invest the money. I really like HSAs. And most of the time, triple tax free is better than double tax free. But if you end up not using the money on healthcare, then it ends up functioning just like a traditional IRA, and maybe the Roth IRA could have been better for you in that situation. But I can tell you what I do the first week of January is I max out my HSA and I max out my Roth IRA. I do them both the same day. I think they're both awesome. I'd love to see you be able to do both. But if you have to choose one or the other, HSA's probably got more tax benefits. So I think it's okay to do that first.
Helps a little with the student loan payments too, because
Yeah, and you get
HSA helps
save payments.
bring down those student loan payments. So, just a little something else to throw in there, a little bit more cost effective in training, helps with cash flow, and keeps those payments down a little bit. So, all right. This is coming in from Ken H. Any general advice on resources on how to handle taxes for the year when transition from resident to attending? How to deal with taxes on stipend and signing bonus during residency?
All right, here's my general advice. Number one, prepare to pay as much in taxes as you were earning as a resident. That's probably the biggest change when it comes to taxes. You think you're paying taxes now. I got news for you. You're not paying taxes. All right. You hardly pay anything in taxes. You pay a few $1,000s. It's nothing. Okay. Your quarterly estimated payments when you become an attending are going to be, $25,000 if you're self-employed. You'll pay that every quarter. It's a totally different ball game when it comes to taxes. We have a very progressive tax system, and attending physicians tend to be in high tax brackets and residents tend to be in very low tax brackets. So that's the first thing to prepare for. Secondly, if you're going to be an employee as an attending, this really is no big deal, right? They withhold taxes as a resident. They withhold taxes from your signing bonus. They withhold taxes from your attending salary, and come April, you settle up with the IRS. They probably withheld a little too much and you get a few $1,000s back as a tax refund and you're good to go. The only time it gets complicated is when you become an independent contractor or a partner of some kind immediately. And typically you don't become a partner immediately out of residency. So it's only when you go to an independent contractor job, like if you're doing locums or something. Now you're in the self-employment world. And the expectation from the IRS is that we have a pay-as-you-go tax system. You're supposed to pay taxes as you earn the money. Okay. You can't wait up to the end of the year and pay it all in April, or you get penalized for doing that. And the penalty is really just the amount of interest that the IRS could have earned on the money in the time you were supposed to have paid it to them. It's not like they throw you in jail or something. It's not terrible, but there is a penalty there to doing that. And so you want to start making quarterly estimated payments. And if you come out of residency in July, your first one's probably due September 15th. Your second one's due the next January 15th for the third and fourth quarters. If you're getting a huge signing bonus, they're probably withholding from that. If they're not withholding, you probably ought to make a quarterly estimated payment on that. How much? It's guesswork. All this quarterly estimated stuff, you're just making it up as you go along. I've been dramatically off and low. I've been dramatically off and high over the years. It's not the end of the world as long as you have the money to pay the taxes. That's the most important thing. So if you're going into the independent contractor world, the self-employment world, I'd recommend you carve out about a third of what you earn and put it in, a separate account on a spreadsheet, or actually a separate physical account at the bank, and call it your tax account, and make all your tax payments out of there. That way you'll at least have the money when the taxes are due. If you made the mistake of underpaying during the year, at least you have the money in April to pay the taxes due and a little bit of penalty and interest. But if you're an employee, this is no big deal. They withhold everything for you, and they have tables that tell them about how much to withhold, and they're mostly pretty accurate. So I wouldn't sweat it too much, other than the fact that you got to assume that, a big chunk of that income you think you're going to get is not coming to you. It's going to the tax man.
All right. M234 from studentaid.gov. The SAVE repayment program does not have a cap on how high payments can be. When income hugely increases, what do you do? Okay. It really depends. Okay. I know we've said that a lot tonight, but it depends on how high your student loan balance is. If you're not going to make more than you owe in student loans, you don't have to worry about this payment cap. You don't have to worry about how high those payments will go when doing SAVE versus IBR versus pay. But if your income is going to be much greater than your student loan balance, say you owe, I don't know, $200,000 as from medical school, and you're going to make 500 grand as an attending, and for whatever reason you still want to do PSLF, that can still work out, but you got to get into a payment program, pay or IBR, that caps your payments, because with SAVE, sky is the limit. I've seen, payments that were $15,000 in the SAVE repayment program, right? I've seen some crazy numbers, how high that can get. Whereas with pay and with the income-based repayment program, they are based on the loan balance at the time when you entered repayment as a resident. And it's based off of, whatever that original principal balance was of, if it was $300,000, think of that payment capping out at about 1% of what that balance is, at about $3,000. And that can bode and be very, very helpful if you're doing loan forgiveness and the objective is to keep those payments low.
All right. Andrew, we now have 1,800 people on this webinar. We never had this while we were actually presenting. Apparently the Q&A is the way to go. We should have just done a Q&A webinar. So welcome to all of you who are just joining us now. You'll get an email with this entire presentation. We actually talked for about an hour and a half presenting before we started the Q&A here. But we're glad to have you. Thanks for what you do.
And Jim,
you're only tuning in now because you were at the hospital, and maybe you finished a, who knows, 30-hour shift and had a rough day and whatever. We're glad you're here. Thanks for what you're doing. We'll keep answering your questions as long as we can take it.
Okay. And I think maybe some of the reporting's a little bit off, Jim, but I think you're spot on that a lot of the residents are just getting done with shifts and have finally been able to get
all the
food
West
into
Coast
them.
people just getting home.
Yep. All right. This is coming in from AH. Should we be waiting until the new PSLF servicer is set in June to consolidate? Let me break this down. So the Department of Education contracts with companies that are called student loan servicers. They don't own your loan, but they just take care of the day-to-day, collecting your payments, calculating your interest, and letting you know when you have to recertify income once a year, all that jazz. So what's happened is the public service loan forgiveness program has usually been administered by a loan servicer. And in the past, it was a company called FedLoan, and then FedLoan stopped this process about a year ago, and they got out of the student loan business. And then they handed the keys to Mohila, and Mohila started doing the PSLF program really kind of summer last year. And the Department of Ed is changing things again. They keep changing this, and the actual process, the administration of public service loan forgiveness, is no longer going to be done by a student loan servicer. It's going to be taken in-house by the Department of Education. So don't worry about that transition of PSLF. that should not be putting you in a position to delay the consolidation to move into repayment, because you want to start your repayments as soon as you can as a resident in June or July or whenever you begin, because that's when the clock starts for PSLF. Let that changing of administration, changing of the guard play out, because that will eventually, and that's supposed to finalize in July this year, but this shouldn't be any reason for you to put off consolidation.
Okay. Yeah, the staff's texting me, telling me it's maybe not 1,800. I don't think it's counting right. I think Twitter's doing something funny.
Yep.
That's all right. We're glad whoever's still here is still here. I mean, we're pushing 3 hours on this webinar, and there's at least 150 of you just on YouTube. So.
Yep. All right. This comes in from Juan Hernandez. You said to not hire your spouse since you end up paying Social Security plus Medicaid taxes. If you're hiring them part-time and put all their income into 401k plus match, wouldn't that lower taxes in the end?
This sounds like an attending sneaking into the resident webinar. Here's the deal. A lot of people are like, oh, I'll hire my spouse and we'll get another 401k and that's going to, lower our taxes dramatically. But what they forget about it is payroll taxes, right? Especially if your spouse doesn't have some other job, isn't making money anywhere else, right? You got to pay Social Security taxes when you hire them, and Medicare taxes, and probably PPACA taxes, right? So here you are paying 15% plus just in payroll taxes that you're not getting anything for in order to contribute more money to a 401k. Well, you might not get that much of a benefit out of the 401k contribution. So there are ways in which maybe this works out a little bit better. For example, if you got a customized solo 401k and you're only paying them $30,000 or $40,000, so not that much in payroll taxes, and you're getting almost all of that $30,000 or $40,000 into the 401k, well, maybe it can pencil out and be okay, especially if you leave that money in the 401k for many years. But as a general rule, hiring your spouse is not as good a deal as a lot of people think it is. Hiring your minor kids, on the other hand, that's a great deal, right? When the only owners of the business are their parents, when it's not a corporation, they don't get paid enough to have to pay any income taxes. You don't have to pay any payroll taxes on them, and all their earned income can go in a Roth IRA. I mean, that's a great deal. Mm-hmm. Compared to that, hiring your spouse is not as good. But is it possible to come out ahead doing this? Yes, it's not as good as you think it is. Make sure you calculate in the payroll taxes when you run the numbers.
This is coming from Aka. My wife graduated residency in June 2023 and never submitted any PSLF forms. Are we still able to submit after the fact? She's attending at a nonprofit now, and we will likely be going for PSLF. Yes, this can all be done retroactively. I have worked with docs that perhaps they had never heard of PSLF. Maybe they're living under a rock. I don't know. They had never heard of loan forgiveness, and they were able to retroactively apply, get their residency and all their attending time qualified, and in 3 months, they had their entire student loan balance discharged. So yes, you can do this all after the fact, and once you have done that for their residency, it would just be one form for their entire time, the 3, 4, 5 years that she was in residency. And then going forward, people always talk about how many times do I need to certify my employment? Is it once a year? Is it 4 times a year? Do I need to do it every single month? If you do it more than once, I really think it's overkill. I would just once a year, when you already have to sit down and do that IDR recertification, or you send them your pay stub or your tax return, just do your PSLF application as well. I like to lump those tasks so that you can sit down and, June 15th is the one day that I'm going to have to do my student loan stuff. I'm going to do my income and I'm going to do my employment form, and then rinse and repeat and continue to do that each year until you hit your decade.
Yeah, for sure. Behavior matters more than math in a lot of this stuff.
This comes in from Mustafa Tarab. Can you go into detail about investing options that doesn't rely on getting interest or stocks?
No interest and no stocks. Now we're getting tough. Based on your name, Mustafa, and the question, I'm assuming you're Muslim. I have an entire blog post about investing in a halal way in accordance with Islam, etc. I recommend you check that out. If you go to the web and you search any of those terms, you will find that blog post, and it goes into extensive detail on Islamic compliant investing. But if you are trying to avoid interest and trying to avoid stocks, there are lots of other options out there. You can go invest in real estate. You can invest in commodities. Obviously, in real estate, you're not going to be borrowing money to buy the property, but you can do that. You can pay cash for properties and just collect rents on them. Bitcoin, there's no interest involved there. It's not stocks. What else could we do? Not a lot else, right? It gets really tough if you're very strict about your interpretation of Islamic compliant investing. It can eliminate a lot of pretty standard investments. In fact, a lot of people, they don't like to use stocks that have where the companies are borrowing more than a certain amount, and so that can eliminate a lot of stocks from the options. But most people just invest in an Islamic compliant mutual fund and call it good and let the fund managers worry about the exact rules and regulations in taking care of that.
All right. Okay, a lot of questions still. So yeah, we could go into the night hours, Jim.
Let's take a few more and then call it. And if you don't get your question
good.
answered, you can email us. I'm an editor at whitecoatinvestor.com. Andrew is andrew@studentloanadvice.com. The answer might be you just need to book a consult with Andrew, but we'll answer as much as we can.
This comes in from Sam Hudson. If you have bad investments, whole life insurance, mutual funds, and I'm assuming probably actively managed mutual funds, should you move them to good investments, Roth IRA, term life insurance?
Well, it depends, right? It's like everything else tonight. It depends. If you're going to dump your whole life insurance policy, make sure you have term life insurance in place first. But you also ought to run the numbers, especially if you've had this thing for a long time, because the poor returns in whole life insurance are very heavily front-loaded. If you've already owned the thing for 5, 10, 15 years, it might make sense to keep it at this point going forward, because the returns going forward might not be too bad. All the crummy returns are already in the past, in the rearview mirror. So keep that in mind. I've got a couple of blog posts on that about, how to analyze your whole life policy to decide whether to keep it or not. If you do decide to dump it, sometimes it makes sense to actually exchange it into a type of annuity, and you get some tax-free gains as it grows back to your basis, the amount you paid in premiums for that whole life insurance policy. But something to consider there. As far as mutual funds, it depends on where they are. If the mutual funds are in a Roth IRA, a 401k, or some other type of tax-protected retirement account, you just swap them. You swap them tomorrow. It's no big deal. There's no tax consequences whatsoever. You realized you made a mistake. Great. You can go to a low-cost index fund tomorrow, and it costs you nothing. So yeah, absolutely, you should move that. On the other hand, if this is a mutual fund that you bought 15 years ago, and the basis is now only a third of its value, there's some serious tax consequences to selling that in that taxable account. And so you might want to consider those and say, well, maybe this investment isn't too bad. It's not worth paying the taxes to make the change. On the other hand, if it's a fund that you just bought last year and you have a loss on it, you can sell that. You probably ought to sell that and swap it into a better mutual fund and claim that tax loss. I wouldn't think of term life insurance as an investment, though. That's insurance, right? If you need insurance, buy term life insurance. If you don't need insurance, don't buy it. Hope that helps. There's a blog post called Legacy Investments and What to Do with Them. You might want to search for on the blog that can help answer that.
All right. This is from Parth Vyasa. If my private student loans are sitting at 2.5% interest rate, how long should I let cash sit in my HYSA high yield savings account at 5%?
There's a math answer and a behavioral answer.
And the math is going to tell us pay off those private student loans in the longest amount of time, because your money, even in The safest HYSA investment is making more than putting money into these student loans. The emotional one is going to say, just get rid of the student loan debt, right? So I think it's very behavioral. I think it's pretty personal here, but 2.5% interest rate loans, you might want to just ride those out for a long, long time, because who knows if we're ever going to get rates that low again anytime soon.
Yeah. I've got a medical school classmate. I came out in 2003 and all my classmates refinanced their student loans at like 0.9%. I have classmates that still have them. They're paying the minimum. And there was a point of time for a few years when they weren't earning any more than that in cash. But for most of the last 20 years, they've been making more than 1% in cash. And so it made sense to carry them, at least mathematically. I think one of my neighbors is down to like $10,000 in student loans. Though at a certain point, you got to go, this just isn't moving the needle. I want to simplify my life. I want to be debt free. I'm just going to pay this off, even though I'm only getting 2.5% for doing it. And it just comes time to simplify your life. You know, I mean, I'm not going to go borrow at 2.5% to buy a washing machine because I can earn 5% in a high yield savings account. It's just not going to move the needle in my financial life. And when your financial life gets to the point where this sort of stuff doesn't matter, then maybe it's time to pay it off.
All right. This is from CA. Do you have recommendations for those of us who will need to support our parents as attendings?
Yeah, I've got a recommendation for you. You probably ought to do it. If you need to, you need to. This is a cultural thing. You know, for a lot of people of European descent, the expectation is you go out the door at 18, you're on your own. You're not getting anything from us, but we don't expect anything from you. That is not the case in many Asian cultures. In many Asian cultures, the parents will sacrifice dramatically to get their kids into school, through school, etc. And there is a pretty heavy societal expectation there that you will take care of them in their old age, that you have become their retirement account. And so you've got to know your family and your culture and what's expected there, and you know, and make your decisions accordingly. But the bottom line is, financially, this is just another expense that you budget for, just like you budget for a car, you budget for a 529 for a kid to go to college, or you budget for, you know, a new house or whatever. You budget for supporting your parents. And, you know, you might need a bigger nest egg. You might have to live longer. You might have to have a higher savings rate. You're probably going to have to spend less on yourself and your kids in order to be able to support them. You know, it's just math, right? You don't get a pass on math. If you're going to spend $20,000 a year supporting your parents, that's $20,000 you can't spend or you can't put toward your own financial goals.
All right.
You can claim those dependents though, so make sure you do that. It might help your taxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they're getting, I think, isn't it 50% of the support, and they're in your household size, they're in your household, then yeah, absolutely. Okay, this comes from Andrew Met. Tax and loan question. Thoughts about married filing jointly, then refiling as married filing separately for PSLF purpose. So we did talk about this a little bit earlier.
In the reverse order, though. Is he asking doing this married filing jointly first?
Okay, so
I've never heard of anybody doing this before.
You can't do this after tax day. So if you file your taxes in February and you file jointly and you realize you screwed up and you want to do a married filing separately, you can file a 1040X, you know, superseding return that will supersede that previous return. If you're trying to file separately after tax day, April 15th, or, you know, if it's April 17th or whatever the day is, you can't do it. You can only amend from married filing separately to married filing jointly up to 3 years after the return has been filed.
You're saying you can't go back the other way.
You can't. You can't go from married filing jointly to married filing separately after tax day.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a weird little, you know, there's our tax code again, right?
Yeah. And what about the timing for your PSLF certification? I mean, typically when people are talking about doing this strategy, which has questionable ethics, they're filing first MFS, right? And then doing their PSLF certification, and then going back later and filing married filing jointly.
Correct. Because then in that situation, it's like baking a cake, eating it, and not having to deal with the calories, right? Because you get the low student loan payments, and then you do your next income certification, and then you can go back and amend that tax return, from 2 years previous, and get back the extra taxes, the quote unquote tax penalty, the increased tax liability that you had to deal with to file separately instead of jointly. And so you get that back in a refund, or you could have that applied to future tax years. And the Department of Ed doesn't make you repay on all those student loan payments at whatever the income and whatever the payment would have been at the higher income. Yeah. So it's kind of it is definitely a loophole in the system. So, and I think another thing to bring up there too is I've talked to some CPAs about this, and they said you can totally do this. Just know that, well, now you got more returns that the IRS could potentially be looking at. So,
yeah. All right, let's do one more question, Andrew, and we'll call it. I think we're at 3 hours and 10 minutes on this webinar now. So that's, I think, about as much as anybody should take to listen to this. I know there's still at least 100 plus of you out there, but we appreciate you staying to the bitter end. But let's make this one the last one, and then you'll have to email questions after that.
Okay. This comes from Elizabeth Depovloff. To start investing, do you recommend mutual funds, index funds, ETFs? Can you explain the differences?
Yes, I recommend that. Here's the deal. Okay. Mutual funds are just people pooling their money together to hire a professional to invest for them. They benefit from some economies of scale. They get ready diversification and liquidity, right? They can get their money back anytime they like, and their money's spread out over, hundreds of different companies they're invested in. That's a mutual fund. It's a great way to invest. It probably should be the default way that most people invest. An index fund is a subset of mutual funds. Okay. Mutual funds, index funds basically take a management approach where instead of trying to just pick the good stocks, they just buy all the stocks. And it turns out in the long run that that's a better strategy than trying to pick the winning stocks. It's really hard to just pick the winning stocks. And so index funds are a type of mutual fund, and the type I generally recommend. An exchange traded fund is like a different type of mutual fund. Okay, there are traditional mutual funds that are traded at 4 p.m. every day. An exchange traded fund is traded anytime between, when do the markets open? 9:30 in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's it. That's the difference between a traditional mutual fund and an exchange traded fund. As you can trade it all day long on the exchange, or you can just put an order in and you do the buying and selling at 4 p.m. Eastern. That's literally the difference between mutual funds and ETFs. There's a few minor tax advantages to most ETFs over most mutual funds. But when you're at Vanguard, the difference is basically non-existent. So ETFs are great. Index funds are great. Mutual funds are great. I invest in all of those things. But it's important to learn the terminology and know what all these things talk about. I think that's it. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here with us tonight. We appreciate what you're doing with your lives, and we want you to be financially successful. We truly believe that doctors who get their financial ducks in a row become better physicians, better partners, better parents. And that's the mission we're on here at the White Coat Investor, and as well as at studentloanadvice.com, is helping you to get a fair shake on Wall Street. Stick around on the blog, stick around on the podcast, stick around on the video cast, join us in our communities, be a White Coat Investor, and help the next generation to learn all this stuff that you're learning now.